Welcome to Fantasy Audiobook, American Comics. The Savior Starting from the Vampires. Chapter 21. The dim light shines on the bar at midnight. Emily counts the revenue she earned today, and she is a little excited. Thanks to the disappearance of the motorcycle gang, there are more and more customers in the past few days, and the revenue increases dramatically every day, getting closer and closer to her goal. Ding ding ding. Lin Ju closed and locked the door of the bar tightly, and looked at the girl who was guarding her hands at the bar and looking at him in panic with a smile. Emily, are you counting your money again? What do you mean by counting money? This is to realize your dream. Oh, what is your dream? Lin Ju's eyes lit up and he suddenly became interested. Lin, you are still very young, don't you want to go to college? Emily blushed and said quickly. So it's going to school. It's going to college, Emily corrected with big eyes. By the way, why did you come back so late today? I warn you, you are now a person with a formal job, don't fight with others outside, even if it is out of good intentions. Emily's little face changed quickly, and she started to teach Lin Ju with a stern face and a little adult look. Because the two of them have very similar personalities, in a short time, they are like friends who have been together for a long time. Ha, don't worry, you will never hear about me fighting against crime again. Lin Ju patted his chest and promised. Yeah, looking at the girl who shifted her attention to counting money, again, Lin Ju felt a little sour in his heart. Yes, Emily should have been in high school, but because of her father's accidental death, she had to drop out of school to manage the tavern business. Before, Lin Ju was a little curious about how such a thin girl could live with such a high workload every day. My joining must have made the girl feel a lot more relaxed. Lin, don't worry, you are mine now, and I will prepare your share for you. Emily suddenly raised her little head, spoke very quickly, and then kicked her legs quickly and ran upstairs quickly. Looking at the earlobe that flashed by and turned red, Lin Ju felt warm in his heart. His eyes moved, looking at the moonlight reflected obliquely from the window in the bar. Lin Ju's eyes gradually became empty, and he had a new goal in his heart. Since Lin Ju started working in the bar, Emily has assigned him a separate room, which is the second floor of this bar. They each have a room, separated by a small warehouse. Coming to his bedroom, it is a little small, but it has everything. Lin Ju leaned on the soft quilt, listened attentively, and the slight breathing sound slowly reached his ears. Even if they were separated by a room, Lin Ju could still hear Emily's soothing heartbeat and even breathing frequency. This girl falls asleep so fast. Lin Ju was a little envious, at least it was difficult for him to fall asleep on the bed, especially after depriving the blood ancestor of his ability. Lin Ju's energy seemed too strong, and he had to count sheep to thousands every night before he could fall asleep. It can be said to be happy and painful. Time passed, and when the bright sunshine slowly shone through the window on the white curtains, the whole room became bright. A breeze blew, lifting a corner of the curtain, and the warm sunlight shone on Lin Ju's cheek, waking up slightly. Lin Ju subconsciously sat up and looked at the alarm clock beside him. Quote exclamation mark quote. With the speed of a whirlwind, Lin Ju quickly put on his work clothes and rushed out of the room. There was a constant noise downstairs. It was obviously broad daylight, but many guests had already come. Lin Ju was accustomed to drinking in the daytime. Quickly went downstairs. Hey, Lin, is the sun shining on your little butt? Haha, Lin, I skipped work today. Lin, bring me 2 more barrels of wine. Amid the continuous shouting, Lin Ju quickly rushed to Emily, who was quickly passing the wine glasses at the bar. Emily, why didn't you call me? Lin Ju quickly took some of the wine that needed to be passed, and said with some dissatisfaction. I want you to sleep more, after all, you work so hard every day, but I don't have a day off for you. Emily laughed softly. Emily, you are such a competent boss. Damn, who was sitting at the bar, said with some envy. Soon, Lin Ju's figure shuttled between the tables of the bar, delivered all the drinks to the guests' tables, and came to Dam's side. Thank you. Dam had been helping to pass the wine just now. Hey, why thank me? I'm your best friend. Dam opened his eyes wide and pretended to be dissatisfied. A large glass of wine was placed in front of Dam, and Emily's crisp words rang out. Dam, this wine is for you. Haha, thank you. Dam's face was full of joy, and he took a big sip, and seemed to be a little embarrassed to drink. Cough cough cough. Lin Ju patted his back helplessly. Watching Emily turn around to organize the wine rack, Dan quickly got to Lin Ju's side. Lin, have you heard? It seems that 3 people died in the street next door last night. My friend in the police station told me that the murderer this time seems to be the one who had a conflict with the motorcycle gang at that time. Huh, why do you say that? The cause of their death was either a slap to the chest bone or a kick to death on the spot. It was too brutal, but those 3 people were not good guys either. They had many criminal records and were among the fugitives. Indeed, brutal. Lin Ju pretended to be amazed. Narrowed his eyes slightly and kept looking at him. Lin, come and deliver the wine. Well, Lin Ju quickly jumped away, quickly rushed to the bar, and took Emily's plate. Isn't it him? What a coincidence. Dan looked at Lin Ju walking between the wine tables, thoughtfully. At noon, the bright sunshine shines on the white snow outside the window, illuminating the entire neighborhood. Lin Ju was leaning on the sofa with his legs on the sofa stool, basking in the sun, looking extremely lazy. Noon was a rare rest time. Everyone went back to eat or work. This leisurely time will continue forever. By 3 o'clock in the afternoon, people coming off work will start pouring into the bar again. With a thought in his mind, a translucent light curtain appeared in front of Lin Ju. Looking at the information above in surprise, at this time, the movie cover above changed, and a new dimensional cover appeared next to the original cover of the Blood Tribe series. It was a man with dark skin, his back turned, and he drew out the long sword from his back with one hand. A bleak and solemn atmosphere enveloped Lin Ju. Blade, did I get into trouble with a vampire? Lin Ju's eyes flickered as he looked at the new movie cover. He quickly recalled the content of the series in his mind, and his heart became more and more excited. Hi! Suddenly, a small head came up in front of Lin Ju. The delicate face reflected an inexplicable halo under the bright sunlight, making Lin Ju's heartbeat suddenly accelerate. Huh, Lin, this doesn't scare you at all. Emily retracted her little head, her face a little depressed. From her perspective, Lin Ju's face was expressionless and he didn't look frightened at all. The slightly contracted pupils opened. Lin Ju closed the dimensional cover, looked at the pretty girl sitting on the sofa opposite, and showed a knowing smile. Eastern District Chief Constable. A police detective looked directly at the screen, and the pictures on it turned in turn. A green subtitle in the upper right corner showed the shooting location. The second vertical street of Wallier Street. How's it going, George? Did you find anything? An elderly police detective with a fat body and a haggard face came over. His tone was a little solemn. Not yet. This guy has perfectly avoided the surrounding surveillance cameras. Coupled with his speed, it seems to be extraordinary. Many shots can only capture an afterimage. I didn't expect such a guy to appear in our East District. Batman in the Central District has started killing people again recently. What do these guys think they are? Since they dare to kill people at will. Batman. Is Batman okay? It's not that crazy yet, but the guy in front of me died both times he appeared. It can even be said to have a 100% mortality rate. George's eyes were solemn, staring at the page on the computer where he was stuck. He was wearing a black robe and mask, his back to the camera, and he was holding 2 tall adults with each hand. Hey, bosses, have you noticed another detail? A black police officer suddenly poked his head in and said to the 2 of them. George's eyes shifted to the computer in front of him. At this moment, it was also fixed in an alley on Hallier Street. There was a man pushing a cart on it, and he seemed to be going there. Where does it look like? This is. George stared intently at the screen. The black police officer on the side quickly enlarged the picture on the screen, and Lin Ju's blurred face appeared in front of the 3 of them. I told you a long time ago that all the surveillance cameras should be replaced. What did these cameras capture? Looking at the blurry picture, with his face completely unclear, George couldn't help but yelled and cursed loudly, attracting other police officers on the side. What's the matter, George? It's nothing. I found a person appearing at the location where the judge's incident occurred. He is somewhat suspicious, but I can't see his appearance clearly. The elderly police detective looked at the black police officer. Have you ever dropped any other cameras? Where did this person come from? Where is he going? It has been transferred, starting from 2nd Street and ending at 3rd Street. The suspicious locations are Wall Street and Horst Street respectively. The destination may be a garbage disposal plant and a waste processing plant. This is mainly from his. It is inferred from the cargo transported by pallets. I'm coming. What a nice view. Just when George couldn't help but want to ask something, suddenly, the police officers in the police station exclaimed. With a frown on his face and a trace of dissatisfaction on his face, George looked at the surprised colleagues around him and looked in the direction of the noise. A graceful figure slowly approached. A hint of surprise flashed in his eyes, and George quickly calmed down the ripples in his heart, looking calmly at the woman who was greeted by the police officer and came to his side. A delicate face, big eyes, and a tall figure hidden under a black coat. No wonder this happens, George thought to himself. Hello, my name is Patrina. After gently shaking hands with her, George looked at Patrina seriously. As for what happened that night, I hope you can describe it in detail. Patrina's eyes quickly glanced at the police detectives gathered around her. The corners of her mouth were slightly raised, and she did not rush to reply to Detective George. Her crisp words echoed through the quiet police station at the moment. I was pushed downstairs that night. I hope he gets the punishment he deserves. ... Well, don't worry, the police have filed an arrest application against him. I believe it won't be long before he is arrested. How long will it take? Fellow police officers, you won't give him a wide berth just because he is a senior executive of the Allen Group, will you? Miss Patrina, believe us, what we want to discuss now is the person who rescued you from the criminals, and we hope to get some information about him from you. Can I ask who he is? Suppressing the dissatisfaction in her heart, Patrina's eyes flashed slightly and she looked directly at the middle-aged man in front of her who looked a little anxious. You don't know. He is a judge who has become famous recently. He has appeared twice so far, and each time ended with the death of the criminal. I hope you can realize how terrifying he is. Terrible. Indeed, when I was in despair, those three people really made me feel terrible. ... His brows were furrowed tightly, and George's face looked a little unsightly. In fact, they had also asked some people who had passed through the motorcycle gang incident before, although they knew that they might not get any useful information. But he was still decisively rejected by those people. People seemed to be extremely protective of the hero who killed so many people. And Patrina seems to be like this too. He is very young and has a faint smell of alcohol. Patrina looked at the surprised police detective in front of her. Are there any other clues? George looked closely at Patrina. He didn't have any hope at first, but he didn't expect that things would turn out differently. Patrina's big eyes scanned the computers in front of the police officers, and her tone softened slightly. I wish I could have a look at the surveillance cameras from that time, which might help me recall some of the details I overlooked. Soon, with the help of George and the black police officer, Patrina reviewed all the videos at that time, and her eyes hurriedly glanced at Lin Ju, who the black police officer said was a major suspect. So, do you think there's something wrong with this person? The black police officer looked excited and pointed at Lin Ju's blurry image. Shaking her head, Patrina said decisively, that person seemed to have noticed me before the incident happened, but he had no intention of coming to help. Do you think he might be the judge? ... This extremely simple logic instantly made several police officers who had consciously discovered something just now blush. Indeed, this logic was simple and straightforward, but they were too eager for success and did not expect it. Looking a little helpless, George sent Patrina out of the police station personally. Officer, I have cooperated with you as much as possible. I hope you can arrest the man who deliberately murdered me as soon as possible. Okay. Seeing Patrina leaving, George had a thoughtful look on his face. What's wrong? You can't bear to part with this beautiful woman. The young police officer who came to the side looked at his senior with a smile in his eyes. I'm just a little strange. It's only been 2 days since she fell from such a high building. Why doesn't she seem to be okay at all? Well, maybe the fall wasn't that hard. Boom. A lightning-fast palm slapped the young police officer's head down, and George cursed angrily with a stinking face, "Get out of here and get to work." In the only separate office in the police station, George knocked gently on the closed door. Come in. When he opened the door, he saw an extremely fat white man leaning back in a chair, staring at the computer screen that was flashing various lights at the moment, and occasionally laughing. George's face looked a little unhappy. Sir, I want to ask, what is the result of the application for the arrest warrant of the director of the Allen Group that was submitted before? The middle-aged sheriff with 3 blue bars on his shoulders looked slightly condensed, and then looked at George, who was frowning at him at this time with a smile on his face. The director of the Allen Group is not an ordinary person. How can his arrest warrant be so easy to apply for? Also, didn't I ask you to track down that judge as soon as possible? Why are you back again? The arc at the corner of his mouth pulled down, and the sheriff's tone became heavier and heavier. Without getting any feedback, even if he was used to the character of the head of the bureau, he still couldn't accept it. George, with an ugly face, slammed the door and walked out angrily. Looking at his subordinates who left in a hurry, Leon smiled slightly, and looked at his office computer again. On it, The Secret of the Origin of Some Kind of Creature was playing. As the mouse slowly slid upward, a slightly heavy breath resounded in this huge office. Bang! George couldn't help but yelled loudly, and the black police officer who was about to ask was instantly frozen in place, and then silently retreated to his original position. ... Thump, thump, thump. There was a clattering sound of footsteps on the smooth ground. Patrina walked in the underground passage, passing through the men who cast their eyes and then looked sluggish. She was accustomed to this situation. She recalled the scene she had just seen in her mind, and Lin Ju's blurred face lingered in her mind. Her eyes seemed to look behind her, and the 2 men turned their backs quickly, looking like they were chatting happily. Hey! The next moment, Patrina's pace suddenly increased, and her figure quickly shuttled through the crowded crowd. Thanks to her amazing appearance, many men who noticed her made way in advance. Under a group of flattering eyes, Patrina quickly disappeared in the crowd. At this time, the 2 men who were squeezed and unable to struggle in the crowd shouted angrily, pushing the people around them fiercely, but still lost Patrina's figure. In the dark alley, Patrina carried 2 clothes bought today on her back, walked upstairs quickly, and then entered the room. Pressing the switch on the side, with a click, the room was still dark. Broken again. Putting the bag aside, Patrina took off her high heels and walked towards the living room slowly. Just when she just passed the wall between the corridor and the living room, a black shadow suddenly attacked. In an instant, Patrina instantly bent back and avoided this swift blow. He turned over backwards and kicked the black shadow fiercely. Bang! With a muffled groan, the mysterious man flew backwards in an instant. The next moment, a flash of white light instantly forced Patrina, who was about to rush forward, to retreat. The second killer's attack was extremely fierce, but he could not do anything to Patrina. She cleverly avoided every attack. Patrina dodged quickly, and her reaction speed was extraordinary. After a straight attack, Patrina punched the tall man in front of her fiercely. The small fist seemed to contain powerful power. Bang! The man flew backwards and hit his partner, who had just stood up. He picked up the dagger at his side, and the knife flashed, and flew out at high speed, instantly sinking into the man's shoulder. HMPH. With a muffled groan, the man fell heavily on his partner behind him. The next moment, Patrina's sharp 3 steps turned into 2 steps and rushed to the front of the 2 men. Bang! 2 consecutive kicks hit the heads of the 2 men heavily. In an instant, the 2 men collapsed to the ground. Without any hasty breathing, Patrina turned to the side of the living room and turned on the switch directly, and the yellow light shone in the hall. Looking at the 2 people who collapsed beside the shelf at this moment, she directly took off their masks, and 2 ordinary faces came into view. After a casual search, she received 2 sharp daggers and a silenced pistol. Patrina's eyes flashed slightly, and then she dragged the 2 fainted people out of the house slowly. 30 minutes later, the chief police of the East District, with a taxi parked outside the police station, watching the 3 people getting in and out of the taxi, the 2 police officers who were smoking outside the police station instantly took out their pistols. "What are you doing?" one of the younger police officers shouted sternly, but the next moment, when someone approached, both police officers were stunned. Patrina handed the 2 people in her hands to the police, and looked at George, who was staring at her at the moment with an expressionless face. "So you subdued them both by yourself? Well, I'm good at it." George frowned, and now he couldn't understand the beautiful lady in front of him more and more. "Miss Patrina, I didn't expect you to be not only beautiful, but also so powerful." The young police officer on the side had bright eyes and couldn't help boasting. Patrina nodded slightly, and the small move made the young police officer excited instantly. I suspect that they are killers sent by the OWL group, and I strongly urge all police officers. Okay, the case is accepted, you can go back. The Eastern District Sheriff strode out of the office, his eyes hurriedly passed over Patrina's face, and his tone was direct. All right. Patrina showed despair, and slowly walked out of the police station. In an instant, the atmosphere in the police station fell into a strange atmosphere. What are you looking at? Why don't you give me a job quickly? The Eastern District Sheriff looked ugly, and seemed to realize that his actions were a bit excessive, but he had no choice. The superiors issued an order to reduce the big matter to a small one, and the small matter was reduced to a small one. Coupled with the inexplicable large amount of funds in his account, this crisis must be suppressed. As for the two people who were caught, he will also personally try them. Patrina's expression changed quickly as she walked out of the police station. Her delicate eyes looked out at the dark streets, and all the streetlights that were supposed to illuminate were extinguished. Ms. Patrina, do you need us to take you back? The young police officer from before quickly ran up to her and couldn't help but say that even though the police station was located here, there were often armed fights just one street away. Thank you, I can go back alone. Patrina smiled, forcedly, and quickly disappeared into the darkness. Well, the young police officer looked at her leaving figure silently and sighed slightly. Crime is everywhere in Gotham, even the police station is no exception. At midnight, the lights were dim, snowflakes were flying in the air, and the neighborhood fell into darkness. As a truck drove by, the long-term peace was broken. It's such a cold day for us to deliver the goods. Well, in this world, you don't know that a cruel guy has come to this area out of nowhere, and many brothers died tragically in his hands. The superiors don't have time to deal with that guy at the moment. Now they can only let us ship goods in such a harsh environment. Let's bet that he can take a rest tonight. Quote. Boom, boom, boom. The sudden knocking sound made the two of them cower for a moment, and then a man who reacted fiercely patted the rear compartment. Those goods are fresh, don't move. He seemed to be warning his companions in the trunk. The thumping sound in the car suddenly became quiet, and the driver had a lewd smile on his face. Let's switch driving in a while. I'll go to the trunk to warm up. Warm you, uncle. Soon, the big truck slowly drove into the dark factory, and one after another muscular and strong men stepped forward. One of the leaders, Huang Mao, looked at the man in the passenger seat. Did you encounter any problems along the way? Without. Soon, two men came to the rear compartment. As the rear door of the compartment opened, their faces froze and their whole bodies trembled. The changes in the two people also made people on the side look surprised. Huang Mao's expression changed and he quickly came to the two of them. The scene in the car made him look extremely ugly. What's wrong? The two people responsible for transporting the goods noticed something was wrong in the atmosphere and hurriedly ran to the back car. Before they could get closer, the yellow-haired man punched them instantly and knocked them to the ground with 3 punches. What are you doing? What did I do? Even if I wanted to die, I still wanted to harm us. Do you know who this batch of goods belongs to? It belongs to the Mask Club. After saying this, the man with yellow hair rushed forward and beat the two of them severely again. At the same time, he also called on his men to beat them together. 15 minutes later, the two people, who had been beaten with bruises and swollen faces, were pulled to their knees outside the trunk. Looking at the empty carriage, their faces were pale. Bang 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 bang. Crisp applause resounded in the empty factory, and everyone, including Huang Mao, looked at the visitor in shock. After seeing the person clearly, Huang Mao's expression changed. As for the two people kneeling under him, they cried bitterly and kept begging for mercy. A red and white clown mask was placed on the man's face. Behind him were a group of people wearing various masks, who walked slowly to Huang Mao. Boss, what happened this time is entirely because of these two losers. They lost the goods. We did exactly what you ordered. Huang Mao gritted his teeth, suppressing the fear in his heart, and looked at the man in the clown mask who was leading him at this moment. After gently patting Huang Mao's shoulder, the man in the clown mask looked past him and looked at the two people who were kneeling and begging for mercy. Boss, I'm sorry, please spare us. The two of them kept repeating the words of forgiveness, and their foreheads were slammed to the ground, and a trace of blood oozed out after 2 blows. Under the frightened gazes of Huang Mao and others, the man in the clown mask slowly pulled out a butcher's knife from his back, and gently stroked the polished blade with one hand. The hoarse voice echoed throughout the factory. "Ua." The next moment the sword suddenly appeared. Huang Mao clutched his neck tightly, and hot blood sprayed out from his fingers. At this time, his eyes widened, glaring at the man who suddenly turned around in front of him. Ahem. He wanted to curse loudly, but the air bubbled out from his neck and he couldn't say a word. The next moment, accompanied by a series of screams, he fell heavily to the ground. From the corner of his eye, he watched his men being hacked to the ground by people wearing various masks. The scene was so bloody that the 2 people who were kneeling on the ground were instantly paralyzed with fear, trembling all over and not daring to say a word. As Huang Mao died, the burly man wearing a bear mask slowly wiped the blood-stained long knife back and forth on his clothes. A man wearing a snake face mask walked step by step towards the 2 kneeling people. The 2 struggled and fell backwards, trying hard to climb out of the factory. However, the next moment, they heard a muffled groan. They only saw a dark shadow flashing in front of them. Their eyes moved, and the 2 of them looked behind them in astonishment. A man wearing a black trench coat and a western hat was slowly letting go of the snake-faced masked man's neck. Thump. Looking at the dull eyes under the mask, the 2 fell into a daze. "Judge." The man in the clown mask quietly retreated, his eyes fixed on the mysterious man who was shocking the entire audience. "So it's you who have been kidnapping and torturing girls recently? Mask Club. What the hell? Go to hell." The bare-faced man fiercely drew his knife and rushed towards Lin Ju. However, even though the difference in stature between the 2 was huge, the results were extremely contrasting. A lightning-fast punch passed over the speeding sword and struck the big man's neck hard, followed by the sound of bones cracking. In an instant, gunfire echoed throughout the factory. Bang bang bang. These people wearing masks took out their guns and shot, but the scene in front of them made their faces look horrified. Lin Ju stood on the spot, with afterimages scattered around his figure, as if he was swinging left and right at high speed. All the bullets passed by him, and he looked at the clown who ran to the back of the crowd. The next moment, Lin Ju rushed towards the crowd who had emptied the magazine. "Monster, die." Just 5 minutes later, Lin Ju, who pinched the clown mask man's neck with one hand, looked at the clown who was still staring at him with a calm expression. He took off his mask directly. The man's appearance made Lin Ju slightly stunned. It was as if he was burned by flames. The reddish-brown tumor was tightly attached to the epidermis. The man had no skin. "You will die, Judge. You know." Crack. Throwing the lifeless man to the ground, Lin Ju slowly turned around and looked at the detective who suddenly appeared behind him with some surprise. "Don't move." George stared at Lin Ju, and under the black mask, a pair of scarlet pupils flashed by. The next moment, accompanied by a trail of afterimages, Lin Ju passed George at an extraordinary speed. The police officer who wanted to block the door was knocked to the ground in an instant. He was about to draw his gun and shoot, but George quickly ran in front of him and grabbed his hand holding the gun. "Inspector, do you want to die?" George glared at his men with fear in their expressions. His eyes swept over the 2 people lying on the ground. Just now, Lin Ju killed them instantly when he passed by them. Looking at the faces of the 2 people with blood flowing from all 7 orifices, he walked up and slowly pulled their hair. "Ah!" The police officer on the side looked at the scene in front of him and subconsciously couldn't help retching. Even George looked ugly. The skulls of the 2 people were broken, as if they were smashed by a palm. What kind of monster is this? Looking at the sky where heavy snow was still falling, George's expression was extremely solemn. In a dark, deep alley, the thick snow seemed to tell that no one cared about this place. An afterimage slid past, and Lin Ju's boots were completely submerged in the snow. Etc. Whoops. With a slightly rapid breathing sound, a woman with amazing curves in a leather jacket put her arms on her knees and kept breathing heavily. Obviously, she seemed very tired. Patrina looked directly at Lin Ju, who had his back turned to her, and spoke very quickly. "Why did you kill those guys?" "Kill. Their bodies are stained with blood and exude the smell of sin. Death is also a kind of kindness to them." The deep voice echoed in the deep alley. Lin Ju looked into the darkness without turning around. He could hear the strong heartbeat of the woman behind him. This seemed to be a very distinct change from the one he had met before. That's not the heartbeat that a normal person can have, it's slow and powerful. He quickly recalled some superheroes or supervillains he had learned in his previous life, and a figure flashed in his mind. But that person's appearance and shape were somewhat different from this person. A long time ago, after seeing Bruce Wayne's completely unfamiliar appearance in the newspaper, Lin Ju realized that this world was completely different from what he had seen in the past. This world was filled with a large number of extraordinary people, and the development trajectories of many things it is also far different from before, so he will not deliberately intervene in this world. Although it was said that he had traveled through American comics, Lin Ju felt that he had just traveled to a similar world, or a parallel world. This world was more chaotic and there was no absolute good or evil. Killing doesn't solve everything, Patrina shouted softly, with a hint of persuasion. Lin Ju's eyes flashed slightly, but the words of the woman behind him did not shake the thoughts in his heart at all. He was certainly not a murderous person, but if he killed, he could quickly accumulate energy to travel through the dimensional world. Lin Ju felt that, on his hands, there's nothing wrong with getting some sinful blood on your hands. Those girls, what are you going to do? As if they heard the conversation between the two, in the dark alley, 3 girls hugged each other and slowly walked out. They looked at the dark masks nervously, with gratitude and fear in their eyes, which looked extremely complicated. Previously, Lin Ju rushed into the carriage and punched the man guarding them to death on the spot, frightening the 3 of them. Give it to you. As soon as he finished speaking, Lin Ju's figure disappeared instantly, without waiting for Patrina's slightest reaction. The extraordinary dynamic vision made Patrina closely follow Lin Ju's disappearing figure. What was different from ordinary people was that in her eyes, she could clearly see the afterimages of Lin Ju. Feel every step and every move of your arms. Knowing that she couldn't catch up, Patrina simply gave up. Looking at the figure disappearing into the night, Patrina secretly said in her heart, "Sooner or later I will know your identity." Looking at the 3 girls huddled together and looking at her, her eyes flashed with pity. As everyone disappeared into the alley, about 3 hours passed before police cars drove slowly through the alley. In one of the police trucks with a large compartment, several police officers were constantly controlling computers and connecting to nearby surveillance cameras through the internet. George's eyes were fixed on the images captured by the cameras. I didn't expect there was a second person. Who is this guy? The old police detective looked at him with surprise and pointed at a slender figure on the screen. From the surveillance camera, this mysterious guy seemed to be there. Tracking the judge. George's eyes were looking at the scene of Patrina leaving with the 3 girls, and soon he locked on the target location. As the police car sped away, police officers quickly surrounded a coffee shop that had just opened. As the door of the coffee shop was knocked open in an instant, George held a gun and pointed it at everyone in the hall at this moment. Ah! Amidst the screams one after another, his eyes quickly passed over the frightened faces. "Officer, what's going on?" An elderly woman walked forward tremblingly and asked with a puzzled face. "Please cooperate in the search for wanted criminals." He extended his hand to signal, and soon one police officer rushed into the inner room of the coffee shop and found an open window in the bathroom on the 2nd floor. The officers reluctantly returned to the living room. At this time, George was comforting the 3 girls huddled in the corner of the living room. "Did you see what those 2 people looked like?" Seeing the 3 children shaking their heads desperately and looking pale and frightened, George felt helpless. Soon, the 3 girls were taken back to the police station in a police car. They briefly took notes and ended the interrogation amidst the angry scoldings of the girls' parents. "What are they doing? They went out to catch criminals, but they actually targeted our savior." Yes, if Gotham's police department really worked for us taxpayers, this society would not be so chaotic. My poor daughter, I almost couldn't see her. Woo-woo, thank you, the judge. Until they leave. The police station had just returned to peace, and everyone's faces looked a little ugly. This time, they had actually discovered the criminal behavior of Wang Mao and others a long time ago, and had been tracking them, but they didn't expect that the judge would kill the criminals first. Now they are being scolded. "Boss, let's not care about the judge anymore. I feel that guy is more terrifying than Batman. Look at those guys in the central area. They have turned a blind eye to it. The police officer who tried to intercept Lin Ju outside the factory before said with some lingering fear. The fear of an ordinary person dying directly from the extraordinary still made him difficult to let go. Can that guy be the same as Batman? George said unhappily, staring at the screen. This was the third time he had repeatedly watched the blurred scene of Lin Ju saving 3 girls from the truck and then killing Wang Mao and others. Pa pa pa. The crisp applause resounded in the police station. Under the surprised eyes of many police officers, the boss of their police station was smiling and welcoming a man with white hair and a tuxedo into the police station. The man smiled and clapped his hands. Our East District Police Department is dedicated. It's only early in the morning, and everyone is already working seriously. Alan Grayson. Looking at the familiar face, George stood up from the armchair, with a very serious expression on his face, and strode towards the man. Detective George, what are you going to do? Leon stood in front of Alan with an angry face. Escorted by the sergeant of the East District Police Station, Alan walked out of the police station with a smile on his face. A stretched black luxury car slowly got out of the car, and 2 men and women in smart clothes stepped out, respectfully greeted Alan into the car, and then sped off. Thank you, Laura, for your help. Alan, who was sitting in the back seat, looked at the man driving the vehicle. Ms. Laura hopes that Sir Alan can be more peaceful recently. There seems to be some unsettling factor in the East District. Judge, that guy is an extraordinary person. It is indeed a bit difficult, but it is not an unsolvable problem. Alan smiled slightly and looked at the expressionless woman next to him. He could clearly feel a chill emanating from his body, and his hair stood on end. It was the suppression of ordinary people by extraordinary beings. Looks like I got unexpectedly good luck this time. Looking at the speeding streets outside, he had deep eyes and murmured to himself. Soon the vehicle drove to an abandoned church. Alan got out of the car first and looked at the seemingly empty church, with the corners of his mouth slightly raised. Suddenly, black shadows jumped down from the beams of the church, and their feet hit the ground without making a sound. After a while, 5 men and women dressed in black came to Alan. The 5 people bent down and bowed one by one, looking at Alan, and they were all silent. The primary target this time is that woman. After we deal with it, if possible, deal with the judge as well. That guy has been too out of touch lately. Yes, neat cheers echoed throughout the empty church. After a while, 5 black figures rushed out of the door. The woman who got out of the car followed closely behind them with her eyes flashing slightly. Alan came to the 2nd floor of the church, looking directly at the dark Gotham outside. His eyes were blazing with fire. He wanted to control the entire East District, and all the stumbling blocks that stood in his way would be erased by him. The judge killed someone again. It seems that some criminals who like to kidnap women and children were killed. I like this kind of scary atmosphere. It must make the criminals feel scared so that they don't dare to disrupt order at will. On the streets where people were coming and going, people were talking to each other in 2s and 3s, with excitement on their faces. Just because today Gotham East Daily reported that the Inquisitor attacked again, with a record of 34 deaths, which instantly made the headlines. Even surpassed Batman in the East End news panel. The door of a bakery opened instantly. George held a piece of caterpillar bread in one hand and a Coke in the other, walking hurriedly. Listening to the people's comments in his ears, his expression did not change and he quickly arrived at the police station. Detective George, the officer asked you to go to the office. With a slightly gloomy expression, George slowly approached the room where rock music was blaring early in the morning. Sheriff. Turning down the volume of the stereo, the obese middle-aged man stood up with a smile on his face. He slowly walked up to George and gently patted his shoulder with his hand. George, now that the higher-ups have officially issued an order, the Central Police Station will be responsible for the Allen Group's affairs this time. You should not cause any more trouble for Allen. Do you understand? Okay, get out. Looking at the expressionless George, Leon seemed helpless. After George walked out of the room, he returned to his seat and sat down. He looked at some of the details he had discovered in the past few days recorded on the computer. He selected all of them and threw them into the recycle bin, and then emptied the recycle bin. Ouch! Detective George, what are you doing? The black police officer on the side looked at George in surprise. He couldn't understand what George was doing at the moment. The information he had worked so hard to unearth was now being pulled into the recycling bin. A smile appeared on the corner of his mouth, and George tried hard to maintain a calm tone. Maybe, the East District needs a judge. Boom. The bullet penetrated the computer instantly. George grabbed the police officer beside him and hid under the table in an instant. The next moment, countless bullets were fired into the police station from the street outside the window. One police officer after another was shot and fell into a pool of blood. Bang bang bang. Unable to hold back a curse, George drew out his pistol the next moment, using the cover of the table to carefully spy on a group of people wearing various masks walking slowly outside. These guys. The submachine gun spurted out dazzling tongues of flame, and bullets streaked across the table. All the surviving police officers hid behind their desks, followed by a dull bombardment. The door to the office was suddenly blasted open by a rocket, and thick flames spurted out from the office. Looking at the people wearing various masks who quickly stepped past the police station door that fell to the ground, George quickly put his head in and shot. While firing, he organized a counterattack. Under his leadership, the remaining police officers responded one after another, and a gun battle between the two sides was imminent. At this moment, on the street outside the police station, all the people were running around in panic, and no one dared to approach this place. They are members of the Mask Club. A police officer seemed to recognize these suddenly menacing gangsters and shouted with fear on his face. The Mask Club and the others are not the targets of Batman's recent attack. How come they came to our East District? A police officer who had not been involved in the case last night yelled in a broken voice. He, who had little experience, had never experienced such a battle. George remained silent, listening to the continuous gunshots. He was looking for some kind of gap. Bullets pierced through his side. He shot instantly, and one shot instantly knocked down a man wearing a cat face mask. Even if there are casualties in the ranks of these criminals, however, they seemed to be unafraid of death and still attacked the police station. From time to time, a police officer fell in a pool of blood. What made George somewhat fortunate was that these people seemed to have only carried one rocket. Looking at the office that was blasted through the door and filled with thick smoke, he felt no sadness in his heart. Who gave you the courage to provoke our Mask Club? A man wearing a golden monkey mask jumped out of the crowd and shouted sternly. His words resounded amidst the roar of bullets, making George's heart tremble slightly. The next moment, he put his head in and shot an extremely clean shot. The arc of the bullet shot straight towards the man in the golden monkey mask. However, under his gaze, the man in the golden monkey mask jumped instantly, reaching a height of more than 3 meters, quickly jumping to the bunker aside, and at the same time dodged the bullet that was about to hit. Fake as a super criminal. The black police officer on the side looked horrified. At this moment, he suddenly found the landline phone beside him, took it to him in a panic, and started dialing the emergency number. However, the next moment, his body froze, and he suddenly realized that he was calling himself. As the police officers screamed one after another, George, the black police officer and the elderly police detective looked at each other. The sound of breaking glass was accompanied by strange laughter. Except for George, the other two people looked desperate. Oh my God, have you heard? There is a shootout happening in our eastern police station right now. Well, this isn't the first time. Even the central police station has had riots. What does our place mean? How can these incompetent governments protect us when they can't even take care of themselves? Lamentations and discussions resounded in the bar, making Emily's eyes widen. Just as she was about to ask, she was pulled to the wine pavilion by Lin Ju. Let's close the door today. He looked directly at the girl who was a little flustered at this time. Why? Emily was a little confused. Because the police station was breached today. A familiar voice came from the door, and Dam ran to Lin Ju and others with an anxious look on his face. The East District Police Station has been breached. Today will be a carnival for those criminals. We must close our doors and avoid the limelight for the time being. Dam spoke very fast, and his face was full of anxiety, urgency and fear, which looked extremely complicated. Lin Ju cast an appreciative glance. Returning to the bar again, they suddenly realized that they were not the only ones who had this suspicion. Many customers left without thinking about themselves. As Emily announced the news of suspending business, everyone else realized something. In just a quarter of an hour, the originally crowded bar emptied out in an instant. Emily tried hard to pull the heavy rolling shutter door that had not been used for a long time. When she tried her best and couldn't pull it, the next moment, a pair of big hands held her small hand and pulled the rolling shutter door down easily. With a blushing face, Emily suppressed the beating heart in her chest and was pulled up by Lin Ju, quickly rushing to the second floor. He quickly arrived at Emily's cabin and sent the girl into the room. Looking at Emily, who was silent, Lin Ju quickly ran out of the room without thinking much. Why? Emily's cute expression flashed across her face. He closed the door tightly and looked at the camera in the corridor on the second floor with gleaming eyes. He installed this camera, and of course he informed Emily about it. The reason why he was so anxious and in a hurry was because he wanted to do something. He was watching the news constantly showing news that the police station had been breached. His face darkened, and he quickly arranged his clothes and came to the door of the store, looking at the group of people standing outside the store in surprise. Lin, where is Emily? Jordanson looked directly at Lin Ju with a serious face. At this moment, he was followed by 7 big men with guns in their hands. His eyes were constantly looking at the passers-by who were hurriedly walking around. I asked her to go back to her room and stay there. You have a good sense of crisis. Jordan patted Lin Ju's shoulder and looked towards the second floor. A certain curtain was slightly rolled up, and his little head retracted and breathed a sigh of relief. Uncle Jordanson, why don't you stay in the store? After saying that, Lin Ju stepped aside, and Jordanson and others also walked into the bar. One by one, they sat in front of the bar and started to pick up their drinks. Lin Ju closed the door and felt a little more at ease. In the tavern, looking at Lin Ju's leaving figure, Jordan's eyes were extremely deep, and a subordinate on the side was a little puzzled. What is this guy doing out at this time? Go drink your wine, maybe I have something to deal with. Okay, boss. Forrest. Across the street from Emily's tavern, a chubby figure poked his head out. It was Dam, who had left with the guests before. Lin. Can you save George? Dam's face was filled with anxiety, and he looked hopefully at Lin Ju, who was running quickly and calmly. His tone was mixed with a hint of probing. George. There was a trace of doubt on his face, and the next moment, a photo was handed to Lin Ju. It was a smiling middle-aged man in police uniform. Nodding slowly, Lin Ju looked thoughtfully at Dam, who looked worried at the moment. Please take good care of Emily. If anything special happens, tell me in advance. Dam's pupils shrank slightly and his lips trembled a little. The next moment, his suspicions seemed to be confirmed. Lin Ju slowly took off his clothes, and put a sparse and spacious black robe on his body. He brushed past the stiff Dam, walked straight to the corner of the alley, and casually picked up an ordinary-looking stone. The brick was pulled out, and a black mask appeared inside. Putting the mask on his face, Lin Ju's figure turned into an afterimage and appeared in front of Dam. He patted his fat shoulder casually and quickly handed a card to the bag on his chest. Looking at Dam's trembling body, Lin Ju couldn't help but want to laugh. The next moment, in his unbelievable eyes, his figure was shuttled through the neighborhood with afterimages. Wow, Judge, oh my God! Continuous exclamations resounded through the streets, and more people noticed the afterimages passing through the crowd on the streets. Some people were scared, some were ecstatic, and some showed admiration, but all of them followed Lin Ju and rushed towards the place they thought was the most dangerous. That direction is the East District Police Station. Bang, bang. After slapping himself hard twice, Dam suddenly woke up from the state of shock and looked ecstatic. God, my God, the judge turned out to be my good friend, I really guessed it, aha. With his fat body jumping high, Dam's face looked enthusiastic at this time, and his whole person looked excited and happy. He slowly took out a black card from his pocket. The entire card seemed to be semi-hollowed, about 1/4 the thickness of a thumb, with bright red liquid inside, and a font printed on the surface of the card. Trial. Dam also noticed that at the bottom corner of the card, there was a line of small fonts, please smear blood on it every 3 days. This was Lin Ju's plan. He wanted to change this chaotic city. First, he started with a business card of his own. He also exchanged a worm from the dimensional store and placed it inside the card. Being the body of his ancestor, he exchanged the worm for it. At that time, he established a special connection with it out of thin air, and could sense the general things near the worm, and even be able to control it. Excitedly placed the card with bright red fonts on his chest. Although he didn't understand what it was, he understood the meaning of friends. His fat body flexibly shuttled among the crowd. Soon he came to a hotel where he could directly observe Emily's tavern. He booked a room on the second floor, opened the window on one side, and stared at Emily's tavern movement. He wanted to ensure Emily's safety and feed back information to Lin Ju in a timely manner. On the street, as more and more people followed behind him, Lin Ju suddenly increased his speed and stayed far away from the group of people who were following him closely. However, even if the distance was so close that they could no longer see each other, they still could not see each other. Many people followed him and ran towards the police station. The corners of Lin Ju's mouth raised slightly. This effect was exactly what he expected. Along with the faint sound of gunfire, Lin Ju's pupils shrank. With his supervision, he could see the street where a gun battle broke out in the distance. At this time, the sky was empty. A group of people wearing various masks came out from a broken door. The originally bustling and lively police station street was now empty, with randomly discarded food and packages everywhere, as well as police cars burning with blazing flames. All the people around had fled to other places, and no one was willing to stay to help the trapped police. Bang! A sharp bullet instantly shattered the glass and hit the roadside electric pole fiercely. Lin Ju's figure stopped beside the electric pole. His eyes swept across the tall building not far away, where several cameras seemed to be filming something. Ignoring those people, his figure suddenly rushed into the police station, but the next moment, his figure hurriedly passed by. Countless bullets exploded, and the door of the police station, accompanied by the sound of residual glass breaking, Lin Heng climbed to the second floor at an extraordinary speed. As soon as his figure jumped to the second floor, the next moment, a fist shadow flashed and hit his chest heavily, but Lin Ju did not fall down the stairs, but hurriedly punched the man who attacked him in front of him and punched him out. Slowly walked into the second floor, looking directly at the three burly men wearing brown bear masks standing in front of him. "Are you late?" A deep voice rang out, and as soon as the voice fell, gunshots rang out downstairs, as if to indicate that there were still police officers resisting. The three men slowly looked at each other, and then rushed over, heavy and powerful fists whistling fiercely around Lin Ju, but Lin Ju easily dodged them. These three men obviously have quite good fighting skills. Each of them seems to have the strength of an underground boxer, and they cooperate with each other very well. However, no matter how good the fighting skills are, they are in vain in the face of absolute strength. After Lin Ju dodged the attack of the three men again, he quickly swung his fist, and the fist that turned into a residual image in an instant hit the faces of the three men. Bang bang bang. One of them fell to the ground instantly, his nosebleed splattered, his head tilted, and he fainted directly. Lin Ju's casual punch was also amazingly powerful, far beyond what ordinary people could bear. The other two used their arms to block the extremely fierce punch. With a slight curl of the corner of their mouth, Lin Wechi stepped forward and threw a straight punch without any fancy moves. The two subconsciously blocked it in front of their chests. However, the next moment, Lin Ju's left arm suddenly swung upward from the bottom, and a standard uppercut instantly blasted the burly body of the big man in front of him into the air. "Ah!" The big man screamed, and blood flowed from his mouth. Ignoring this man at all, Lin Heng turned around and kicked the other man in the abdomen. Puff! In an instant, blood spurted out, and the blood sprayed on the ground. The other man fell heavily to the ground. Lin Ju appeared again beside the man who was kicked to the ground by him. The shadow of his legs flashed, and the pistol that the man had pulled out from his side was instantly detached. He kicked the man's neck again. Feeling the silent bodies of the three people, Lin Ju gently wiped the blood on his mask, looked around quickly, and soon locked onto the stairs on one side. The bodies of policemen lying on the stairs seemed to confirm how the three people came up. In the lobby on the first floor, George gently pulled the body of a teammate over, took out the remaining magazine from his side, and pulled out the magazine of his pistol to replace it. As for the old detective and the black policeman, they were holding their guns on the side and occasionally poking their heads out to shoot. The people of the Mask Society had already killed their way to the middle of the hall. Many policemen had their skulls smashed by the Golden Monkey Mask Man, and the scene looked bloody. Paw paw paw. The sound of fierce gunfights suddenly resounded beside the door. By chance, George just poked his head out to shoot. Looking at the afterimage that flashed outside the bureau, he was slightly startled. The next moment, the terrorists who stayed in front of the police station fired their guns, instantly breaking the already broken door. My God, are these guys crazy? The black police officer who didn't know the situation couldn't help but scream. He noticed the masked man who was shooting at the gate at the moment. In his sight, there was no one outside the gate. It seemed that with the movement of the gate, the Golden Monkey Masked Man who was killing people stopped his actions and hid his figure in front of a policeman's work desk. Slowly stretching out his hand to signal, 3 people wearing pig head, chicken head, and bird head masks slowly walked out of the door and looked around. The exchange of fire in the police station suddenly stopped. The criminals' attention shifted to the outside of the door, and the police took a breath slightly, and the two sides were in a stalemate. Looking at his men outside the window, he returned to the police station again, and saw him shaking his head to indicate that there was nothing unusual outside the door. The corner of the Golden Monkey Masked Man's mouth pulled up an exaggerated arc, and the next moment, the sound of gunfire rang again. He wanted to kill this group of policemen in one breath. The atmosphere of despair once again enveloped the police station. Soon, a policeman at the back was the first to suffer casualties. It was as if a switch had been turned on. From time to time, policemen were shot in the head because of their heads. Noticing the sound of gunfire, the bullets hit the wall fiercely. George pulled the black policeman who was about to shoot back to the front. The bullet went along the edge of the table and instantly hit the wall behind them. Thank you, Boss George. The black policeman was terrified and thanked him in a hurry. With the screams one after another, the sound in the hall stopped again. At this moment, George and the other two at the back looked at each other and saw each other's determination. This is the consequence of provoking our mask society. The Golden Monkey Man raised his loudspeaker and shouted loudly, his voice echoing throughout the police station. At the same time, the speakers outside the police station also broadcast loudly. He wanted to let everyone know that the mask society could not be provoked. This time they attacked the police station to show off their power and lay the groundwork for their boss Black Mask to unify the dark forces of Gotham. Feeling the power contained in his body, the Golden Monkey Masked Man stared at the last row of police work tables. At his signal, the masked men surrounded them and slowly walked towards the last police officers. The subtle footsteps were getting closer and closer. George slowly put the grenade he had just picked up in his hand, and the three looked at each other. Just as the footsteps were about to arrive, there was a muffled sound. Bang! Ah! Fierce screams suddenly resounded in the police station. The next moment, the sound of bullet shooting continued again, and the whole hall was filled with screams and bullet bombardment. Lin Ju's figure turned into a series of afterimages, dodging the bullets that were shot at him. In an instant, he grabbed the collar of the nearest person and threw him to the place with the most people. The body of the person who flew out was instantly beaten into a sieve in the air, and blood splattered everywhere, and hit the 4 criminals wearing masks and frantic. Before they could move the body away, Lin Ju appeared in front of them with 4 lightning-fast punches, hitting them hard in the heart. The scene fell into silence, and everyone stared at Lin Ju, who appeared in front of the 4 criminals with their mouths open. The black robe fluttered, and the shadow of his fist was as fast as lightning. In the blink of an eye, Lin Ju stood up with his fist closed, and turned to look at the police and criminals who were watching him. Plop! 4 consecutive sounds of flesh falling to the ground were heard, instantly breaking the solid atmosphere. A criminal who was closest to Lin Ju was the first to react. In an instant, the trigger in his hand was suddenly pulled, and tongues of fire spurted out from the gun, wildly shooting at the position where Lin Ju was standing. However, at the next moment, an afterimage passed by, and Lin Ju suddenly appeared on his right side, punching him hard on the waist. In an instant, with blood spraying, the man's body leapt into the air. Just when he was about to fall to the ground, Lin Ju kicked him in the chest with lightning speed. The burly man, who was 1.8 meters tall, flew forward and slammed into the stunned criminals behind him. Oh, my God! The black police officers were stunned, and even George was stunned on the spot. At this time, no criminals bothered to open fire with them, and all the firepower was focused on Lin Ju. From their perspective, the arrogant and domineering laughter of these extremely vicious criminals had already turned into panicked roars. Bullets were fired wildly, and afterimages were interspersed among the crowd. Wherever they went, it was really. The man fell on his back and his horse fell over. Blood sprayed and scattered on the already dirty walls of the police station. From time to time, people flew out, and the black-robed figures in the scene seemed like wolves among sheep. A criminal hit the black policeman hard like a cannonball. He was so frightened that he quickly took aim with his gun. However, he was instantly suppressed by George. The two of them fell to the ground in shock, their masks shattered. His face was revealed as if it were burned by flames. At this time, his pupils were dilated and he looked lifeless. His whole body suddenly stopped breathing. Looking at the depression in his chest, the black police officer couldn't help but gasp. Even being suppressed by terrorist firepower did not bring him such great fear. The sound of gunfire gradually died down, and Lin Ju stood beside several broken corpses, staring thoughtfully at the man with a fierce look facing him. The golden monkey mask was still stained with the blood sprayed by a certain police officer. The corners of his mouth were slightly raised, showing no strange emotion at all because his men were being slaughtered. Look at the killing stance with this punch, Judge. I actually think you are more cruel than a criminal. Lin Ju tilted his head slightly, wondering why the man in front of him didn't take action yet. Are you interested in joining our mask club? The man in the golden monkey mask looked directly at Lin Ju's dark mask, and his tone changed slightly, as if he was smiling. Masked club, what is it? Lin Ju looked thoughtful, and the next moment, a figure suddenly jumped up high, came to him very quickly, and hit his chin with a hard uppercut. Boom! Judge beware! An unknown police officer shouted quickly, but it was already too late. The exposed corners of the man's lips in the golden monkey mask raised in an exaggerated arc, and his eyes shone with excitement. A fierce uppercut sent Lin Ju's body flying high into the air. Without Lin Ju reacting, the next moment he stepped forward again and punched directly into Lin Ju's heart. Boom! The smile at the corner of his mouth froze for an instant, and the man's face froze, and he stared blankly at Lin Ju, who had one hand across his chest and held his fist. A little strength. But it's not enough. A low, plain voice slowly resounded through the police station. Under the ecstasy of the police and the shocked and desperate expressions of the criminals, in an instant, a lightning-fast kick hit the man's abdomen hard. The man in the golden monkey mask, his face was distorted. Different from those ordinary mask club members, as an extraordinary person, he subconsciously put one hand on his abdomen. However, soon, his expression changed wildly, and a surging force instantly pressed his arm against his abdomen. In an instant, he flew backwards. Lin Ju's figure flashed through the afterimages and appeared in front of him again. He kicked him away with a simple and straightforward kick. However, the man put one foot on the ground and flipped over in an instant. The range of posture and movement was exaggerated, but he cleverly avoided the blow. Punch after punch, Lin Ju did not use any skills and kept hitting the man. The man's body was like a spring, swaying back and forth, hastily dodging Lin Ju's attacks. Interesting. After the faint words fell, Lin Ju's face showed excitement, but the face of the masked man who had dodged one attack after another became more and more frightened. It seemed that he was able to dodge with ease, but only he knew that he could only dodge. The two fought for a moment, and Lin Ju subconsciously slowed down his attack. The man who thought he had grasped the opportunity subconsciously punched Lin Ju's face. Lin Ju tilted his head slightly, curved his mouth, and struck the masked man's chin with a lightning-like uppercut from bottom to top. Boom! Completely opposite to the attack just now, the masked man's skull made the sound of bones breaking, accompanied by turbid blood and some white broken teeth, and he fell into a trance. The damage Lin Ju's punch caused to the golden monkey was far more powerful than the uppercut he had endured before. Puff! A lightning-like kick slammed the masked man's body to the ground. Poof! Vomiting blood in large mouthfuls, fear finally appeared on the face of the man in the golden monkey mask, and he looked directly at Lin Ju, who was currently stepping on his chest with one foot and his eyes were deep. You monster! Boom! The floor tiles under the body of the man in the golden monkey mask instantly shattered, and his chest sunk downwards. The luster in his eyes quickly faded. Under Lin Ju's extraordinary hearing, the man's heartbeat stopped for an instant. At this moment, the police station truly fell into silence. Everyone looked at Lin Ju with one foot on the man in the middle of the hall with horrified expressions. The black robe was slightly rolled up by the howling cold wind, and the dark mask only revealed a pair of deep eyes. He didn't say a word, but everyone except Lin Ju felt a shocking pressure. Thump! A man wearing a fly mask instantly fell to his knees and looked at Lin Ju with fear on his face. He had never been so scared, not even when the gang went to war with Batman. That kind of massacre without asking the reason. The moment Lin Ju powerfully killed the extraordinary person, everything changed. It was a moment of implanted fear. Looking slightly at the few remaining cowering criminals, Lin Ju turned his eyes in the direction of the police and looked directly at a familiar face that slowly poked its head. It was George. With his head slightly tilted, George's eyes lit up. The next moment, under his command, the police officers who had been hiding behind various tables and chairs jumped out excitedly and picked up the criminals who were holding their heads in their hands or kneeling down to beg for mercy. Cuffed. Lin Ju's eyes hurriedly glanced outside the house. At some point, reporters and pedestrians had gathered outside the police station. The next moment, his figure suddenly rushed upstairs. Amidst the exclamations outside the house, he jumped out and quickly he jumped over the huge crowd, quickly shuttled between the streets and the bustling latecomers, and disappeared into a remote alley in the blink of an eye. Big news, the judge appears in the daytime to save the Eastern District Police. The Eastern District Chief Constable, who was surrounded by super criminals, was rescued by the judge he had been chasing. Let us further look forward to the mystery of the judge's identity. At this moment, in the central block where people are coming and going, jet black bat masks are hung for sale everywhere, and children in bat suits are playing and playing. Different from the past, the central building that was originally filled with news about Batman's latest crimes began to broadcast a new face. Under the dark robe, there was a black windbreaker, and the black mask was stained with blood. Even the only exposed eye was covered by the cloak, revealing a deep gaze. The man stood in the police station that was almost in ruins. His eyes scanned a group of cowering criminals. It was exactly that some time ago, the last scene of Lin Ju's punishment of criminals was captured by reporters who hurriedly arrived at the time. At this moment, the police officers at the central police station were talking to each other while answering the phone. "Hello ma'am, what's the matter, what?" Requesting that the judge's arrest warrant be revoked and that he be pardoned. "Hello, currently, the judge's area of AA activity is limited to the East District. Please stay calm." "No, why are you worried about the judge finding you? You are not a criminal, right?" In the director's office, Gordon answered the phone. "Boss, one Batman is enough for us, and now there's a judge. What's going on over there in the East District? I heard that the Eastern District suffered heavy losses. Do we need to send some reinforcements?" "No, the people above have been sent." Quote. Gordon frowned. He couldn't figure out which other police station in Gotham could deploy extra manpower besides their central police station, which had a large number of manpower. "How is Batman's case handled? I heard that he killed someone again." A hint of ridicule came from the phone. He has never killed anyone." After hanging up the phone, Gordon had a serious look on his face and slowly held the latest photo in front of his eyes. It was exactly what Judge Lin Ju looked like. The Eastern District Chief Constable at this time. George looked at the scattered documents on the table. They worked for a long time before sorting out all the damaged things in the police station. "I'm coming," a police officer suddenly shouted loudly, and all the surviving police officers looked expectantly at the newly renovated door of the police station. A man and woman with expressionless faces and wearing police uniforms slowly walked into the police station, which seemed a bit messy and had bullet holes everywhere. One of the middle-aged men with beards walked at the front, slowly picked up the table, flipped it to the ground, and looked deeply at the police officers who seemed to be at a loss in the hall at the moment. "In charge of public security. Censorship of crime. Ridiculous, ridiculous. The police station was actually breached by criminals. This is the biggest joke I have heard in my more than 30 years of service." The rich voice echoed through the extremely quiet police station, and all the police officers looked guilty. Striding towards George, who was at the back, the new director with a beard took the lead in extending his hand. "Detective George, hello." Under the incredulous gaze of the black police officer on the side, George looked serious and stretched out his hand to shake hands with the new chief. That Leon, if those criminals hadn't killed him, I would have sent him to a military court for trial. He committed corruption, accepted bribes, formed gangs, and deserved to die. Edrin said bitterly. I have read your files and things. You are the only detective I recognize in this police station. You are very good. I hope we can cooperate well in the future and restore harmony and stability to the East District. Yes. The surrounding police officers looked at each other in shock, never expecting that things would develop into this situation. Quickly walking into the police station office and looking at the brand new equipment, Adrian showed a satisfied look, followed by a soft knock on the door. The next moment, two police officers, a man and a woman, wearing police uniforms with expressionless faces, slowly walked into the room. Sir, when do we start taking action? The woman's eyes flickered and she looked at Edlin, who was sitting in the director's seat. Slowly picking up the judge's information document that he had ordered to prepare in advance from the side, Adrian looked thoughtful. The guy this time is extraordinary. In my opinion, in some places he is even more difficult to deal with than Batman. As he looked at the appearance of the criminals who died in the hands of the judges, including the information about their causes of death, the corners of Adrian's mouth curled up slightly. Allen Group, President's Office. Allen, with white curly hair, looked directly at a brown file, which recorded detailed information on some characters. Talon Archives. His eyes quickly passed over several files marked with file confidentiality and omitted information, and came to a familiar face. Alan Grayson felt a little anxious at this time. Compared with his previous confidence, he was now hesitant after the incident. This time the Mask Club attacked the police station, but it was not as simple as it appeared on the surface. They even sent a super criminal, but he was still killed by the judge with the power of thunder. This kind of thing not only caused shock in the bright world, but also caused an uproar in the underground world. The organization behind him is also a little uncertain at the moment, because many people have been sent to the outer area to perform certain assassination missions, and some are always paying attention to Batman's actions. As the last member of the organization, the resources that the family can apply for have been greatly reduced. This also made him extremely uncertain about his next actions. He had to consider the gains and losses. After slowly placing the document on the table, Alan came to the floor-to-ceiling windows of the building and looked down at the scattered houses in the East District. Pedestrians were walking down the street talking and laughing. He stretched out his palm slightly and made a gesture of grasping the void. Alan's face looked a little gloomy. Doo-doo. The accompanying cell phone ringtone sounded. In the spacious office, calm words slowly sounded. Cancel some operations, including that woman. At this time, people flocked to the largest exhibition center in the East District, admiring the exquisite works of art on display. As the curator, the bald man stood on the second floor with a smile, watching the crowd's enthusiastic discussions, which made him extremely satisfied with the unfolding of the event. Suddenly there was a slight commotion among some people. A woman in a black trench coat slowly walked into the hall, attracting the attention of many men who appreciated literature and art. Even the bald curator's eyes were fixed on the woman. My dear lady, what exhibits do you want to see? A man in a tuxedo came forward with what he thought was the most elegant expression on his face. Chapter 31. No, I just wanted to take a look. Patrina smiled slightly, and the men around her stared at her. He quickly looked at the neatly arranged utensils around him, and paused for a moment at a familiar item. Afterwards, Patrina wandered around the entire exhibition hall until nightfall, when she followed the large group and left. As the visitors left, security personnel in the exhibition hall began to check all the surrounding exhibits until finally, a man closed the museum door and locked it. The entire hall fell into silence. It was midnight, and there was the sound of breaking glass above the hall. A thin black rope slowly dropped down from the top of the building. A masked woman with a curvy figure wearing a black leather jacket instantly slid down the rope. Her delicate big eyes slowly scanned the surroundings, looking at a huge gem located in the center of the exhibition. Her eyes lit up slightly. He kept walking and quickly approached him. However, just as her hands were about to touch the exhibit, she suddenly paused. With her extraordinary sensitivity, thin threads surrounded the exhibit, perfectly matching its glass cover, fit together. Looking at the exhibition stand under the items, Patrina's eyes flashed slightly, and the next moment, she ran towards the office in the lobby. After searching for a long time, she still couldn't find a way to crack the mechanism. Her eyes flashed slightly, and the next moment, she came to the central exhibit again. Suddenly, she seemed to notice something, and she quickly rushed to the wall pillar. She actually grabbed the smooth wall with both hands, and climbed up quickly, like a sensitive cat, and instantly rushed to the second floor. As the glass shattered again, 3 big men with guns rushed in instantly. They looked directly at each exhibit and saw the rope falling straight down from the top at the same time. His eyes narrowed slightly, and one of the big men came to him in an instant and tugged on the rope that fell from the roof. As for the other 2 people, they rushed to the display cabinets on the side, smashing the glass frantically, and put all the exhibits into sacks, etc. Suddenly a voice sounded from above the lobby, and the next moment, a figure slowly emerged from the rock wall on the second floor. Patrina looked at the 3 men who were looking directly at her with a smile. It's not too bad to take it all at once, isn't it? She saw all the actions of these people just now, directly destroying the shield without triggering any alarm system. They seemed to be well prepared. However, the next moment, the 3 men showed no intention of replying. They took out their submachine guns and shotguns and shot Patrina wildly. Moving quickly across the rock wall, Patrina's speed was extraordinary. In the blink of an eye, she rushed to the rock wall behind them, and before they could turn around, she suddenly jumped off the wall. Appearing in front of the man, she swung her legs down and instantly knocked the burly man to the ground, while his 2 men attacked him with fists. Their movements seemed sharp, but from Patrina's perspective, they seemed extremely slow. They turned slightly sideways, quickly dodged 2 powerful punches, and counterattacked with 2 punches like lightning. In an instant, the 2 men fell to the ground with pain on their faces. However, the leader who had been knocked to the ground used a quick and neat combination of punches to force Patrina back, who was about to attack the 2 of them again. The bullets flashed through with dazzling sparks, and Catalina's figure moved at high speed. At this moment, she seems to be more alert than before, like a real cat. The man threw the empty gun on the ground and moved forward. However, in front of Patrina, his fighting skills were like those of a child. He quickly dodged punches and punched quickly. Bang bang bang. In an instant, the man was knocked upside down, and the 2 people behind him also rushed over. Soon the 3 of them were fighting together. Patrina was surrounded but still managed with ease. The body moves quickly, the waist twists, and many difficult movements are performed at will. Bang bang bang. 3 fist shadows hit the 3 men's brains heavily. These 3 punches were Patrina's deliberate punches for a period of time, so they were very powerful. The 3 men who were attacked fell to the ground with their eyes blurred. Without even breathing heavier, Patrina looked at the 3 men who fell to the ground and fainted, smiling. At this time, her condition was better than ever. She passed the bag thrown aside by the men and went straight to the central exhibit. Without hesitation, he smashed the glass that seemed to be a device. She took the gem into her hands with a look of joy on her face, and then she looked around the field, slowly tied the 3 men to the beams and pillars, and after ensuring that the 3 men would not break away, she grabbed the string in the central hall and moved quickly climbing up. The slender figure disappeared into the night. In the early morning of the next day, Ace Grayson looked at the 3 men being pinned to the ground by the police with an ugly expression. The security personnel on the side lowered their heads and did not dare to look at him. Until the police put the 3 men into the police car, with the piercing sirens, Ace rushed in front of the security captain. Bang bang bang. 3 loud slaps resounded in the empty exhibition hall. Waste. Boss, we left early last night according to your wishes. The security captain looked at his boss with a grieved face. Without looking at him, Ace looked at the young man next to him in suits and leather shoes with gold-rimmed eyes with a very gloomy look. Find out the circulation of that thing for me. No details can be spared. Notify the Star City branch and ask them to take action for me too. Okay, boss. The man leaned forward slightly and then slowly walked out of the exhibition hall. Snapped. The sound of the glass cabinet door falling to the ground sounded from behind. The man wearing glasses had a slight smile on his lips, and an abnormal blush appeared on his pale face. Interesting, so interesting. The man straightened his tie, slowly got into a black limousine, took out his mobile phone from the side, and slowly dialed the number on it. Hello. Hearing the voice coming from the mobile phone, the man's face showed a look of respect, and the corners of his lips that couldn't be suppressed looked extremely weird. "Boss, the goods were stolen, and it was not our people who did it." "Aha." He slowly hung up the phone, pulled out the phone card inside, twisted it off, and threw the phone out of the window. "Boss, where should we go next?" The low words slowly echoed through the car. At this moment, the driver slowly turned his head, his pale face twisting into an exaggerated arc. "Ha ha ha." Hearty laughter rang out in the car. "Oh." With a clear drink, Emily slapped Dam's generous back hard and looked at the mottled red liquid on the ground with distress. "Hey, hee hee." Dam cowered his head, looking begging for mercy. He was still holding the broken beer bottle in his hand. He had just put on a cool martial arts pose, but unexpectedly, the bottle of red wine that Emily's father had collected for many years broke. He was originally helping Emily deliver the goods, but unexpectedly, she broke her most precious bottle of wine. At this time, Emily glared at Dam angrily, and then looked at the red wine on the ground with a distressed face, exuding a mellow fragrance. "I told you that I can be alone, let's see what a good thing you do." "Emily, I was wrong." Dam was playing tricks and kept looking at Lin Ju, who was sitting by the window of the bar and looking at his mobile phone from the corner of his eye. Knowing that Lin Ju didn't notice this, Dam breathed a sigh of relief, and then rushed to the bathroom numbly, took out a mop from it, and under Emily's distressed eyes, wiped the red wine from the smooth wiped off the floor. Seeing Emily tidying up the shelves angrily, Dam turned his head 3 times and quickly came to Lin Ju's side. "Hey, you're actually paying attention to Batman." The seriousness in Lin Ju's eyes flashed away, and a smile appeared on his face again. "Why can't I pay attention to Batman? You are the one. The one." Looking at Dam, who was winking and getting excited, Lin Ju shook his head helplessly. Just now he was watching a scene of Batman fighting a superpower who ran from Star City. It was posted online by an unknown netizen without permission. He downloaded it through some illegal websites. The scenes of punches to the flesh make him feel excited. The real Batman is far more powerful than the one in the movie series. Every punch and kick seems to contain powerful power. This made Lin Ju, who had been a little relaxed recently, have a great sense of crisis. After all, the Batman in the video was still fighting a few years ago when he was just famous. Compared with today, his power can be seen through the Daily Times. 1 or 2. That's right, if it's like the movies and TV series, relying solely on technology and fighting skills, how can you become the core character of the Justice League? You must know that the monsters you encounter later are stronger than the last. Those villains have the ability to break mountains and crack rocks. In the real world, if it is an ordinary person, it will definitely be injured with a touch and die with a single blow. His eyes flickered, and he slowly closed the video in his hand. Lin Ju looked at Dam, who was sitting opposite him, and quietly sizing him up. "Dam, since you already know, then I need you to do me a favor." Dam was not surprised but overjoyed, with a fanatical look on his face. He slowly took out a card from the inner pocket of his jacket and placed it in the bag outside his upper body. Looking at the card with scarlet fonts, Lin Ju smiled slightly. "Lin, just because of our relationship, tell me, what's the matter?" Dam patted his fat chest, which made the flesh on it tremble. "Isn't that Detective George your good friend? Help me find out more about recent crimes." "Haha, as expected of you, my friend." Dam raised his thumbs up with both hands and showed a funny expression on his face. He looked extremely excited. After driving this living treasure out of his sight, Lin Ju shook his head helplessly as he looked at the fat man who jumped in front of Emily again. In a Gotham full of dangers, it's a miracle that someone like Dam exists. In more than a month, he has dealt with more than a dozen crimes and killed more than 70 criminals. The high frequency of punishing crimes during this period caused the recent criminals in the East District to hide themselves or simply run to other districts, which greatly reduced the speed at which Lin Ju wanted to further accumulate energy. Originally, Lin Ju thought that it might take another month or 2 to accumulate the energy to enter a certain dimension, but he never expected that after saving the Eastern District Police Station, his dimensional energy soared. Lin Ju discovered another rule for increasing dimensional energy. It seems that according to the strength of the criminals in the punishment trial, the efficiency of dimensional energy accumulation is directly proportional to it. The moment he killed the Golden Monkey Mask, he realized that one of his dimensions was waiting to be unlocked, so at that time Lin Ju was too lazy to eradicate the remaining criminals. With a thought in his mind, a dimensional cover appeared in front of him. The cover to be unlocked is none other than Blade. The content of this series was quickly recalled in my mind. It was a worldview at the end of the 19th century, a world where vampires and humans coexisted. As the only protagonist in the series Blade Runner, he is a half-human and half-vampire. His mother gave birth to him after being bitten by a vampire. At the same time, it is precisely because of his special birth method that he is exempt from all the disadvantages of vampires, including fear of sunlight and silverware. He was adopted by a vampire hunter since he was a child. While restraining his bloodthirst, he developed an incomparable hatred for vampires and eventually became an outstanding vampire hunter. Recalling the main storyline of this series in his mind, Lin Ju frowned slightly. Most of the vampires there were not very strong and seemed to have nothing to take away. His eyes flickered, and the next moment, the film and television series of Blade Warrior slowly faded away, and a familiar series appeared in front of him again. It's the Blood Clan. However, after careful perception, Lin Ju found helplessly that he still could not enter the world of vampires, and the energy required was even higher than he imagined. With a slight sigh, Lin Ju opened the Blade movie cover. Maybe there are some unexpected gains in it. A ferocious image from the movie flashed through my mind. The next moment, Lin Ju's eyes were firm, staring directly at the Blade movie cover, and the time around him stopped for an instant. He has anchored his choice to enter this world. He slowly stood up from the sofa and looked at Dan and Emily, who remained still. At least you don't have to worry about going to a world and coming back to find that your friend is dead. Lin Ju calmed down a little. The next moment, with a serious expression on his face, he slowly stepped into the film and television series that turned into a black hole. A slight trance passed by. The sky full of yellow sand rushed towards his face. Lin Ju subconsciously covered his mouth and nose, looking at the land swept by the yellow sand in shock. Lin, follow quickly. The low words sounded slowly, and he looked at the three people walking in front of him in astonishment. They were looking back at him. Looking beyond the three people, he saw a pyramid. The memories in his mind rotated rapidly, and Lin felt a trace of surprise in his eyes. This is actually not the plot line of the first Blade. At this time, Lin Ju was wearing the uniform of a special forces unit, wrapping his whole body tightly. Looking around at the yellow sand sky and the three teammates in front of him, this familiar scene instantly reminded him of the third part of the Blade series, Trinity. The main story of this series is that the vampire family is deeply afraid of the Day Ranger, also known as the Blade, who slaughters them every day. At the decision of the vampire leaders, they decide to find the ancestor of vampires, Drake. The pyramid in front of me seems to be where Drake sleeps. Looking at the miniature pyramid just a few steps away from him, Lin Ju sighed helplessly. If he didn't have the body of the ancestor now, as an ordinary person, it would be really difficult for him to survive in the next conflict. Survive. Unless Drake doesn't like him. While thinking in his mind, he quickly walked forward. Soon, under the leadership of the three people, Lin Ju came to the tomb where Drake slept in his memory. Just as the three vampires were about to approach the sealed place, Lin Ju suddenly stood up and stopped their progress. Forest. Doubtful words resounded in the sealed tomb, and the three vampires looked at their companions with some confusion. Wait, let me investigate for everyone first. Lin Ju raised a smile on his lips. He wanted to try to see if he could deprive Drake of part of his power while he was sleeping. In his impression, Drake in this series is also the ancestor of vampires. He has quite powerful abilities. In addition to healing and super physical fitness, he is also not afraid of sunlight and silverware. In this regard, he seems to be better than the vampires. The ancestor was more outstanding, but Lin Ju was more interested in another ability. That is the power of illusion. Drake has the ability to transform into any living creature. He suspended his hands over the place where Drake slept in his memory, just when Lin Ju was about to activate his deprivation ability. Countless sand and stones fell downwards. Looking at this familiar scene, Lin Ju slowly stepped back. Except for Lin Ju, the other three people looked curiously at the cave that appeared in the middle. One of the vampires couldn't help but lie down on the ground and wanted to poke his head in to watch. However, the next moment, he was grabbed by Lin Ju and fell to the back casually. The changes in front of them left the other two people at a loss. They didn't understand why Lin Ju suddenly made such a move. The next moment, Lin Jia's hands were suspended above the cave. Deprivation. Invisible power spread downwards instantly, but the next moment, a pair of ferocious arms suddenly grabbed his hand. Under the horrified gazes of the three vampires, Lin Ju was instantly dragged into the cave. Bang bang bang. Countless fist shadows bombarded the demon-like monster in front of him, which was covered in flesh and blood. Lin Ju knew that this was Drake's vampire body. After transforming into this form, he would have even more excellent physical fitness. Drake was obviously unaware of the situation in front of him. The next moment, his body fell downwards, and Lin Ju's figure jumped out. Lin, what the hell are you doing? Gently patting the dust on his clothes, Lin felt that his face was a little dark. In the short fight just now, he found that his nearly full-strength punch could not seriously injure the guy who had been sleeping for a long time. What to do? Teach a guy a lesson for getting angry. Lin Ju chuckled with his face hidden under the helmet. The next moment, a black shadow suddenly jumped out of the cave and suddenly attacked a vampire standing on one side. However, an afterimage passed by. His burly body hit the pyramid's rock wall full of history. In an instant, cracks appeared on the rock wall. Roar. Like a demon's face, his burly body was nearly 2 meters tall. Drake, who transformed into his own body, let out a soul-stirring roar at Lin Ju. The three vampires who reacted at this time rushed towards the outside of the pyramid in panic. How could they not see that Drake was trying to attack them just now? Not even caring about Lin Ju behind him, the three of them slipped out of the pyramid in the blink of an eye. What the hell are you? A low roar resounded throughout the pyramid, and Drake's ferocious face stared intently at Lin Ju, who was standing at the door of the pyramid. Me, am I the ancestor of vampires? Quote. The flesh and blood all over his body slowly dissipated, and Drake, who was originally in demon form, turned into a burly man with a handsome appearance. His eyes were fixed on Lin Ju's head, and he shot out violently, grabbing Lin Ju's head with a fierce claw. However, an afterimage flashed by, and Lin Ju didn't even move away. He just twisted his body slightly and swayed left and right at high speed, easily dodging one after another of his seemingly extremely fast fists. The next moment, a fist flashed through the air, and Lin Ju struck hard on Drake's generous chin. Boom! The heavy bombardment instantly caused a trace of blood to spill from Drake's mouth, and he looked at Lin Ju, who was still standing there with his arms folded on his chest, full of anger. Roar! With a deep roar, Drake showed his sharp fangs, with a ferocious facial expression, and charged forward again. However, soon, he flew backwards at an even faster speed and hit the rock wall heavily. Lin Ju's gorgeous combination of punches and powerful strength left him unable to parry, and his last sweeping kick sent him flying. You treat human beings as meat and human blood as drink. In your long years, how many innocent people have died tragically under your ferocious mouth? Don't you consider yourself the ancestor of vampires? You don't drink blood. Drake's eyes widened angrily and he looked angrily at the mysterious man who knocked him to the ground again. It was hard for him to accept that he had only fallen asleep for a while, but a being who could suppress him had appeared in this world. This made it difficult for him to accept the self-centeredness he had cultivated over the years. What disgusted him the most was that the man in front of him actually claimed to be the ancestor in front of him, the source of vampires, and openly criticized his sin of sucking blood. Yes, I can be considered an ancestor of vampires, but I don't suck blood. Lin Ju chuckled, just thinking silently in his heart that this vampire is not that vampire. He didn't expect that he would be so lucky in this time travel. He could suppress the blood god from the front. It seemed that he could return to reality faster. Because when he traveled through dimensions, he realized that as long as he judged this blood god and deprived him of his power, he would be instantly transferred back to the real world. He walked slowly towards Drake, just as his hands were hovering over his head. A burst of flames flashed past, and a shell instantly hit Lin Ju's back. Boom! The strong explosion instantly slammed Lin Ju's figure to one side. The intense pain made Lin Ju groan in pain, and his whole body was buried in the ruins of the collapsed pyramid. The entire small pyramid seemed to have been bombarded by artillery fire, and it collapsed instantly, burying Lin Ju's figure in the ruins. At this time, he could clearly feel that his back seemed to be ripped open, and some bones were even broken. The intense pain made it impossible for Lin Ju to break away from the ruins for a moment. Fortunately, Lin Ju, who has the body of his ancestor, can clearly feel that he is healing at a rapid speed, and the broken spine on his back makes crunching sounds from time to time. For the first time, Lin Ju felt that things were beyond his control. When he was about to deprive the blood god, he was stabbed in the back by his teammates. If I had known earlier, I shouldn't have stopped those bitcha. Lin Ju cursed secretly in his heart. He knew that things would not be so simple, but he did not expect that the accident would come so suddenly. Catchy. Suddenly, there was a soft crack from the bones on his back, and Lin Ju struggled to stand up from the ruins in an instant, and the heavy rocks on his body were instantly lifted away. His whole body was filled with powerful aura. At this moment, above the pyramid, several thick stones flew out, and a figure with broken body and ragged clothes slowly climbed out of the ruins. It was Lin Ju, looking at the ruins of the pyramid. He did not try to find the blood god, because even when he was attacked and then suppressed by the collapsed pyramid, he was aware of Drake's condition. On the one hand, it was to prevent him from pursuing the victory. Although it was unlikely, after all, although the frontal attack target of the rocket was him, the power of the close-range blast must have severely injured Drake. In his perception, several of his partners picked up Drake and rushed out of the pyramid, leaving him buried here under the rubble. Looking at the dilapidated Special Forces uniforms around him, Lin Ju smiled helplessly and threw the broken helmet aside. He looked at the sandy sky with his heart sinking. The way back is not easy. Buzz. The helicopter made a huge roar and flew quickly through the sky. At this moment, 3 of Lin Ju's former teammates were looking anxiously at Drake, who was leaning in the back cabin of the plane with an expressionless face. One of the big white men was answering the phone and reporting something. From time to time he looked at Dracula, who had his eyes closed. Who's that guy? No, what the hell is that? Drake opened his scarlet pupils and looked fiercely at the 3 vampires sitting opposite him. He could feel the vampire aura in their bodies, which was completely different from the previous guy. He is also one of our teammates this time, and he is a vampire. A thin vampire said somewhat uneasily, but the next moment, an arm with bone spurs grabbed his neck and pulled him forward. Drake's face transformed into his own body again, and he opened his huge scarlet teeth and bit down hard on his neck. Ah! The screams stopped abruptly. Although the man was a vampire and possessed considerable strength, he was helpless in front of his ancestor. His hands were weakly pulling at Drake's chest, but he was completely unable to break away. The other 2 vampires were so frightened that they immediately took out their guns and pointed them at their ancestor from a distance. Frantically sucking the vampire's blood, Drake's face was intoxicated, and his originally dry skin quickly returned to ruddy color. In the blink of an eye, the vampire in his hand instantly turned to ashes. He slowly lowered his red arm and looked at the vampire, who was trembling slightly and pointing a gun at him with a look full of violence. If that guy is a vampire, then who are we? Derek yelled angrily, which made the 2 vampires look at each other, somewhat confused about the situation. After all, in their impression, Lin, who was just an ordinary vampire, suddenly burst out with such powerful strength and once suppressed their ancestor of vampires. This had already shattered their 3 views, and now it was even more so from Drake. Mouth, I learned that the guy wasn't even a vampire. Instead of continuing to attack the 2 vampires, Drake closed his eyes and carefully felt the cells in his body that were rapidly repairing and healing. He was also severely injured in the explosion. New York. 4 pale-faced men and women quickly walked through the dimly lit corridor and slowly arrived at a place that looked like a prison cell. The middle-aged woman at the head quickly arranged her clothes and walked into the room with a respectful and somewhat uneasy expression. On Drake's exposed upper body, the bulging muscles showed his unparalleled strength. At this time, he was grabbing and biting a trembling man. The picture is bloody and horrifying, and even the middle-aged woman who is a vampire and loves cannibalism can't help but look frightened. Because Dracula was eating a vampire at this time, it was the first time she had seen a vampire sucking blood. Great Drake! The low words echoed in the closed room, and the pale woman stared at the man who turned around slowly. How about it? Have you found out that person's identity? A scarlet light flashed in Drake's eyes, and there was still an aftertaste of intoxication on his face. He was much stronger now than when he just woke up. He wants revenge. Suck up the guy who dares to despise you. Great Drake, we woke you up because there is another huge danger. A trace of doubt flashed across the woman's face, and then she spoke quickly. Putting aside the guy from before, the biggest danger to our vampire race now actually comes from the Day Rangers. Is there a greater danger than that guy? Drake's eyes narrowed slightly, with a trace of fear flashing in his eyes. Even though he had almost returned to full victory, he did not dare to say that he could defeat Lin Ju. After all, the guy at that time seemed to still have some strength left. Now a stronger one suddenly appeared, which made him feel unbelievable, and at the same time he became more and more cautious. That guy is a half-human, half-vampire. He is a miracle, but even though he has vampire blood, he hates us and kills our compatriots all the time and every day. Thanks to having half-human blood, he is not afraid of the silverware and sunshine that we should be afraid of, just like you, the Great One. The woman said angrily while looking at Dracula with admiration, with a hint of greed in the depths of her eyes. Oh, half-human, half-vampire. A trace of excitement flashed across Drake's face, but soon he had new doubts. As his descendant, how could that guy be so strong? New York at night, light and dark intertwined. In a street shrouded in dim lights, two drunken men supported each other. They walked through the uneven bluestone road. On the two ancient buildings nearby, black shadows stood on the eaves or roofs. Lie down on the wall. Suddenly, one of the men paused and looked at the figure standing in the middle of the road in front of the road in astonishment. He seemed to notice something was wrong with the situation around him, and the air seemed to freeze, just when he couldn't help but help his companions to turn back. A black shadow suddenly jumped down from a tall building and instantly threw his partner to the ground, almost falling down with him. Looking in horror at the man who was leaning down and seemingly biting his partner, his brain was momentarily confused. Reacting quickly, he staggered towards the back in a panic. However, laughter came one after another from the surroundings. The man looked up in despair and found that at some point, one after another was dressed in black robes and looked pale. The people were looking at him greedily. The voice was filled with tears, and the next moment, a figure threw him to the ground. Scarlet pupils flashed past. He only felt his neck go numb, and his whole body instantly lost consciousness. One vampire after another jumped down from the wall, sucking wildly amidst the choking sounds of the two of them as if something was stuck in their throats. Just as these vampires were enjoying their feast, a figure suddenly ran from the street. A vampire at the back looked at the burly black man in astonishment, holding a sharp sword across his neck. After a lifetime of shrill screams, he clutched his neck tightly, flames spurting from the wound on his neck. In just 2 seconds, he went from spontaneously igniting to burning into ashes. The situation in front of them instantly excited a group of vampires who put down the bloody corpses in their hands and stared ferociously at the black man standing in the middle of the road, holding a long sword and posing in a cool posture. Day Ranger, a vampire who was obviously the leader, roared angrily, and he recognized this killer at a glance, who had recently become famous among the vampire clan. Roar! Under the roar, one after another, vampires rushed up one after another. Each of them had unparalleled speed and rushed in front of the Blade Warrior in the blink of an eye. However, the sword flashed, and the sword swung down with unparalleled speed, instantly cutting off the heads of the two vampires. The Blade Warrior's dark face was expressionless as he slowly placed the knife across his chest again. More and more vampires rushed towards him, but within a moment, the silver sword in his hand killed these vampires one by one. As more and more vampires turned to ashes, some vampires finally became afraid. As the first one began to flee, many more vampires began to flee in all directions. The Blade Warrior slowly put the long knife into the scabbard on his back, and slowly pulled out 2 darts that shone with silvery white light from one side. He exerted force with both hands in an instant. In an instant, the 2 silver dart blades penetrated the 2 men. The vampire who just climbed upstairs. Amidst their shrill screams, their bodies fell heavily to the ground, and then turned into ashes. His thick thighs were straddled fiercely, and his eyes were fixed on the former vampire leader. At this time, his dark face reflected the dim yellow line. He kept walking and ran wildly towards the street on one side. As the two chased him, a dart flew past from time to time and hit a follower. A vampire escaping from the side. Just as the leader vampire jumped out of the block, a hand instantly grabbed his neck. Roar! Roaring angrily, the man's long sharp claws fiercely clawed at the Asian man in front of him, who suddenly strangled his neck. However, the next moment, with a huge force, his body fell heavily to the ground, and he kicked his head casually. His head separated from his neck and flew out, stopped at the feet of the blade warrior. Looking at the vampire, whose chest seemed to be still heaving, Lin Ju's eyes flashed with surprise. The vitality of this vampire was a bit beyond his expectation. After a few breaths, the vampire at his feet finally lost his life. Lin Ju felt a gaze that seemed to be substantial. With a smile on his face, he looked calmly at the black man slowly walking towards him. However, the next move was beyond Lin Ju's expectation. The blade warrior passed by him and inserted his sword into the vampire's chest. Looking at the vampire that turned into ashes, Lin Ju looked at it thoughtfully. The blade warrior passed by him without even looking back. Brother! A trace of embarrassment flashed across Lin Ju's face, but the man kept walking further and further away. The next moment, Lin Ju's figure turned into an afterimage and rushed straight towards the blade warrior. Just when he was about to approach the blade, a silver sword was suddenly unsheathed, a white light suddenly appeared, and the silver sword was pressed against Lin Ju's neck. At this time, Dao Feng's eyes finally changed. He narrowed his eyes slightly and stared at Lin Ju with his hands spread beside his head. Vampire. No, no, no. My friends, I am not a vampire like you. Under Blade's shocked gaze, Lin Ju slowly touched his silver sword, but no burning reaction occurred. Why are you so fast? Dao Feng's voice was sonorous and powerful, and his eyes were fixed on Lin Ju's face. Lin Ju looked at the burly body so close, and he could feel a powerful aura. It was an invincible and overwhelming momentum. How many vampires do you have to kill to feel this way? Lin Ju couldn't help but feel a little admiration. He looked directly at the face he could only see in movies with a smile. Because strictly speaking, I am also a vampire, and I am also the ancestor of vampires. Lin Ju did not want to show off, because his current body is the body of the ancestor, although this vampire is not that vampire. The ancestor of vampires. Dao Feng narrowed his eyes and looked at the kind-hearted Asian man in front of him. There was actually a hint of crisis hidden in his heart. After all, this was the first time he had seen such an agile creature. Under his super sense, Lin Ju's figure ran behind him as fast as teleportation, which was why he reacted like this. Slowly moving Dao Feng's long sword to the side, Lin Ju smiled. Dao Feng, I've heard about the name for a long time, I don't mean any harm. Feeling the power coming from the long sword, the blade's eyes hidden under the sunglasses narrowed slightly, suppressing the fear in his heart, and the trace of surprise that had just appeared in his heart instantly dissipated. He didn't allow himself to feel fear. The bright sunshine illuminated the entire street, and Lin Ju walked in the busy neighborhood. He was rejected. However, Lin Ju himself could understand Dao Feng's psychology. It was just a hasty encounter. It seemed impossible for him to cooperate with him. In an underground factory, Blade Warrior took off his long leather jacket and looked deeply at the TV news report on the table at the moment. He likes to derive the recent behavior distribution of those vampires. In the news at this time, there are reports of missing persons information in some areas. Blade, how was this operation? The old words came from above the factory. Blade turned slightly and looked at his old partner. His usual relaxed response did not appear. Sensing that something was wrong with the Blade's condition, Whistler quickly stepped forward. I met a special guy. That guy was faster than the fastest vampire I've ever seen. His strength seemed to be extraordinary, and he didn't seem to be an ordinary vampire. He claims to be the ancestor of vampires, but he doesn't seem to be one of our kind. Quote. There was doubt on Dao Feng's face, and he looked at his adoptive father and master inquiringly. You're not a vampire, but you claim to be the ancestor of vampires. Are you still not afraid of silverware? A hint of horror flashed across Whistler's face, and he suddenly thought of the story of the vampire hunter passed down from generation to generation deep in his memory. The true source of vampires, the blood god. Although he didn't quite understand the second half of the sentence, the words in front of the blade reminded him of the real ancestor of vampires. Oops. Those vampires actually awakened the demon sleeping in history. Whistler looked ugly and told Blade about the history he had learned, and both of them realized the seriousness of the problem. If Lin Ju were here, he would definitely not be able to help complaining, because Dao Feng did not convey his kind words at all. A historic street in New York. Night fell again, and one vampire after another walked out of the darkness, with wanton smiles on their lips, looking greedily at the passers-by walking on the street. A slender long sword hung in front of him, and the Blade walked calmly towards the group of vampires who were staring at him. He started killing without hesitation, and after stabbing a grinning vampire with his sword, he paused. Watching this vampire slowly take out the two disguised sharp teeth from its mouth, Blade's expression was extremely ugly. They were actually humans pretending to be human. At this time, in a tall building behind him, a female vampire was standing on the top of the building, controlling the camera to capture the scene. After Blade left, an anonymous video report was posted online, causing an uproar. Blade kills people. At the base camp of the Blade Warriors, Whistler was looking seriously out the window at the dark land. Under the blurry light, there seemed to be something hidden outside. It must be those vampires. Whistler took out his shotgun and carried a knife on his back, as if he was about to start a battle, and the Blade was wiping his silver sword. However, the next moment, countless bullets penetrated the glass of the window and flew in. The two men hurriedly looked for bunkers, but the enemy seemed to be unusually fast. In the blink of an eye, with the help of fire cover, they broke through the factory door. Looking at the soldiers wearing special black uniforms, the Blades that were about to start a killing spree trembled in place. "Let's go," Whistler scolded anxiously. As a tacit understanding between the two, Blade turned around and left without hesitation. Whistler, who had originally planned to escape from here as soon as possible, suddenly paused and returned to the computer desk to carry out data clearing and self-destruction procedures. However, just because of his actions, the soldiers who rushed over shot him down without hesitation. With a trace of pain on his face, Whistler glared at the soldiers surrounding him, and pressed the exposure detector in his hand at the next moment. Endless flames erupted from the factory in an instant. Blade, who had just ran out of the factory, looked back with pain on his face. The silver sword in his hand fell to the ground and stood there in a daze. At this time, several special police officers rushed forward and kicked him to the ground, holding his hands behind his back. Dao Feng's eyes were distracted, and there was a sense of pain in his heart. In this way, he was taken away by the human special police. Just when everything was going smoothly, there was a dull crashing sound from the roof of the factory. Lin Ju, who jumped to the top of the factory, looked at the factory burning with blazing flames and sighed slightly. Because he couldn't grasp the rhythm of the plot, he came a step late. He did not intervene when Blade was taken away by human special police, even though he knew that this was a collusion between vampires and humans. With his eyes darkened, Lin Ju recalled the memories in his brain. His eyes suddenly lit up and he knew what he should do. An afterimage passed across the eaves, and his figure disappeared on the roof. The next day, when the afterglow of the setting sun reflected on the mottled wall, a chaotic street is filled with young men and women dressed in hip-hop costumes who look like monsters. Most of them look crazy, shouting, or fighting. Lin Ju walked slowly on the street and looked around quickly. Soon, he found the familiar street store. A slight smile appeared on the corner of his mouth, and the next moment his figure disappeared from the place. At the same time, the man and woman in front of him were stunned. "Baby, did you just see that guy?" "Who?" The girl's face was full of confusion. "A person just flashed past." "Oh my God, that speed. He really ran out of the afterimage." "Oh, David, did you smoke too much? You still haven't recovered yet." The girl chuckled and couldn't help but mock her target, so much so that even the man doubted whether he was hallucinating. Boom! The door of the store suddenly opened, and the man and woman in the store stood up in fright. However, there was nothing at the door of the store. They only felt a gust of cold wind blowing by. The male clerk cursed angrily as he closed the store door again, while the female clerk chuckled lightly and leaned back on the chair, looking relaxed and content. Jingle bell. After a long time, the doorbell rang again, and a tall man with a deep face slowly walked into the store. His eyes passed over the vampire dolls displayed in the store and looked at the clerk who was dressed as a vampire. "Why are you selling these things?" Derek stared at the man and said in a deep voice, "Are you here to buy something, or are you here to cause trouble?" The male clerk, who had not yet calmed down from his anger, immediately cursed and glared at Drake. A moment later, he let out a scream, and his body was instantly thrown away, smashing the glass door heavily. Amidst the horrified screams of the female clerk, Derek pushed her down on the chair. The next moment, his ferocious fangs were exposed and he was about to bite the delicate white neck. A figure suddenly appeared behind Drake. Boom! Drake's burly body fell heavily to the shelf on the side. When his body fell to the ground, it also slid along the ground for nearly 4 meters. Lin Ju's figure appeared where he originally stood. Looking at the frightened female clerk, he knocked her unconscious with a casual palm and slowly turned around to look at the man who was getting up from the ground. "It's you." A low roar accompanied the roar, and Drake's eyes turned scarlet red. His eyes were filled with violence and anger, mixed with a trace of fear. "Drake, you really gave me a hard time searching." Lin Ju looked at the man with an expressionless face, exuding some kind of terrifying coercion. He was not afraid at all. The next moment, a heavy tapping sound was heard, and Drake's body rushed towards Lin Ju with a heavy and powerful punch. "Well done." The corner of Lin Ju's mouth curled up, and the next moment he punched brazenly, his leather-gloved fist directly facing Drake heavily. Boom! The sound of heavy flesh collision resounded through the small shop. Lin Ju's figure involuntarily took 2 steps back. The soreness and numbness in his hands made him look surprised. As for Drake, he took a full step back. After 4 steps, he could barely stop. "Who do you think I am? How dare you cause trouble for me?" Drake looked up to the sky and roared loudly, like the roar of a wild beast. The next moment, his figure rushed forward again. Different from the previous straight punches that had the meaning of competing for strength, this time, his offensive was more fierce, combined with extremely high skill. His body turned into afterimages, and Lin Ju hastily dodged several of Drake's fierce combination punches. Lin Ju was not surprised at all by Drake's sudden outburst. After all, the guy in front of him had thousands of years of combat experience. With combat skills alone, Lin Ju might not be able to defeat him. Seeing Lin Ju moving quickly, relying on his speed to dodge the attack, Drake secretly resented that Lin Ju was originally stronger than him, but there was such a big difference in speed, but something was hard for him to accept. You know, he is the real ancestor of vampires, no, even a god. The violence in his eyes flashed, and Drake did not stop his attack because of the momentary defeat. His body continued to press Lin Ju back. Until he retreated to the wall, Lin Ju's eyes flashed. The next moment, he turned around to avoid the punch and suddenly struck out. The fist turned into an afterimage and hit Drake's generous chin hard. Roar! With an explosive roar, Drake's mouth was filled with blood, and his whole body instantly rose into the air. Of course, Lin Ju was unwilling to give up this opportunity. The next moment, he jumped straight up, kicked hard in front of him, and was about to fall. The burly body fell to the ground. Boom! As the floor tiles shattered, Drake's body fell onto the floor tiles. The fangs at the corners of his mouth were instantly exposed, and he looked ferociously at the man who had a foot on his chest at this moment. This extremely insulting scene instantly stimulated his 1,000-year or even 10-year-old hegemonic mentality. In the blink of an eye, he grabbed Lin Ju's legs. Before Lin Ju attacked again, he used his hands hard and threw Lin Ju's body heavily away in an instant. He quickly climbed up, jumped out, and quickly approached Lin Ju, who was hitting the sales table heavily at this moment. Seeing the fierce foot stepping towards him, Lin Ju's eyes froze, his figure flashed slightly, and an afterimage stayed in place and came to one side. Drake's kick penetrated the shadow cast by his high-speed movement, and stepped heavily on the bar. Along with the cracking of bricks, the bar made of glass and stone bricks exploded instantly. A ferocious roar flashed by, and before Derek could pull out his foot, Lin Ju's figure appeared beside him and punched him hard in the waist. Roar! Like a marble-carved side face, a trace of pain flashed across his face. Derek looked ferocious and swung hard at Lin Ju. His body leaned back slightly. Lin Ju quickly dodged the blow and swung his fist again. A hard blow to the side of his cheek. However, what was unexpected this time was that Drake was not knocked to the ground. With blood spilling from the corner of his mouth, his head leaned forward for a while and then quickly pushed forward, hitting Lin Ju's head hard. Boom! The two of them were instantly separated. Lin Ju shook his dizzy head. This sudden head hit him unexpectedly. Feeling a dark shadow rushing towards him, Lin Ju's face darkened. The next moment, he stepped back, and Derek was obviously holding on. As his body swayed, Lin Ju moved forward again, throwing countless punches. A shadow enveloped his burly body. As he was knocked into the air again by Lin Ju's punches, he hit the wall hard on one side. Under countless cracks, his body was directly embedded in the wall. Lin Ju gathered his strength and rushed forward, fiercely. With a harsh kick, he stepped on Drake's abdomen again. Boom! The man and the wall fell from the store to the street in an instant. The pedestrians who were looking after the mail clerk were attracted by the sound of fighting in the store. At this moment, the shattering of the wall made these people scream in surprise and then ran away. Lin Ju's chest rose and fell slightly, and afterimages flashed by. He came to Drake, who was lying on the ruins, and looked at the big man slowly struggling up from the ground. His eyes glanced at the horrified crowd around him. He quickly squatted down, grabbed Drake's thick calf with one hand, and instantly dragged Drake back into the shop. Accompanied by a heavy bombardment. Bang bang bang. Lin Ju's last punch hit Drake hard on the head. Roar. Drake's face was dripping with blood, his ferocious fangs were exposed outside his lips, and he kept roaring. However, every time he called out, Lin Ju punched him hard. Gradually, he seemed to have finally given up on resistance and collapsed to the ground weakly. Lin Ju, whose arms were a little sore, looked directly at the man who was still staring at him. Realizing that the time was almost up, he slowly floated his palm over Drake's head. Hee hee, Drake sneered, and the next moment, his change made Lin Ju's expression shocked. He saw Drake's originally handsome appearance quickly distorting, and the bright red flesh was exposed on the surface of the skin. In the blink of an eye, Drake's 1.8-meter body soared to 2 meters, with muscles bulging all over his body and flesh and blood flying. Looking at the appearance that was completely inhuman, Lin Ju felt horrified. The appearance and size in front of him was different from that of the one who jumped in the pyramid at that time. The appearance of Drake is completely different. The previous one looked much thinner. While Lin Ju was dazed, a punch as fast as an afterimage struck him hard. The sudden punch sent Lin Ju flying backwards in an instant. Roar! With a ferocious roar, Derek got up with a ferocious smile on his face and looked directly at Lin Ju, who climbed out of the ruins. Lin Ju quickly shuttled between the shelves. At this moment, a monster-like being with a ferocious face was frantically lifting up the shelves. Why are you running? Didn't you have a great fight just now? Drake opened his ferocious mouth and let out a low roar, mixed with a vague smile. This was the most enjoyable battle he had felt since waking up. He violently tore apart the metal shelf in front of him with his claws, and rushed towards the ugly-looking young man behind the shelf with his burly and strong body. Just when his hands were about to touch Lin Ju, the whip legs that were as fast as an afterimage kicked him hard in the abdomen. However, the scene of Drake flying upside down did not happen. Instead, Lin Ju reacted because of the reaction. With the force acting on him, his body couldn't help but fall backwards. Why did this guy become so strong all of a sudden? Lin Ju was secretly shocked. Since Drake transformed, the damage caused by his attacks to him has been greatly reduced. Drake, who leaned back slightly due to the attack, stood upright. At this time, he was enjoying Lin Ju's shocked expression, just like himself when he had just woken up. I am the god of vampires. Drake roared excitedly. His speed suddenly surged again, and between punches and kicks, all the obstacles in front of him exploded. Under his extremely fierce offensive, Lin Ju's figure kept falling back. In a hurry, he put his arms on his chest to block the thigh-thick fist. Under the powerful offensive, Lin Ju hit hard on the wall. Feeling the burning pain on his back and arms, Lin Ju narrowed his eyes slightly. The next moment, he jumped up and passed by Drake's advancing figure. He twisted in midair and gave a fierce blow. He punched and hit Drake's ferocious head hard from top to bottom. Boom! Following the intense bombardment, Drake's body knelt down. Lin Ju, who jumped down, seized the opportunity and kicked Drake's burly body away with another heavy kick. The next moment, he was about to step forward to pursue the victory and flew backwards again. He looked at Drake in shock as he jumped out of the ruins with a mocking look on his face. Lin Ju never expected that Drake's reaction speed would be so fast. Even his attack just now didn't seem to have much impact on him. Are you the ancestor of vampires? I think you are called a vampire turtle. Lin Ju shouted loudly and looked at Drake's proud eyes. At this time, the anger in his heart also surged into his heart. He jumped out and rushed towards Drake brazenly. Turtle, you will pay the price for your words. Bang bang bang. The two figures continued to shuttle through the messy store. All the goods were smashed and destroyed. Feeling the increasing pain in various parts of the body, Lin Ju's heart continued to sink. Seeing Drake, who was still in a state of excitement and constantly bombarding him, Lin Ju, who had always been strong, had to admit that he seemed unable to defeat the transformed blood god at the moment. Derek directly withstood two heavy punches from Lin Ju. With a ferocious look on his face, Drake hit Lin Ju's abdomen with a fierce straight punch. Under the strong impact, Lin Ju could no longer hold back. Blood sprayed from his mouth. He fell heavily outside the store and looked around, noticing the horrified looks of the people around him and the woman lying on the ground on the other side. That was the female clerk he had just thrown out during the fight. The thoughts in his mind stirred slightly, and the next moment, a translucent light screen appeared in front of him, and he looked directly at one of the option columns, a long sword with a shining silver luster. Just as he was about to redeem it, police sirens came from the street in the distance. He once again looked at the burly figure rushing towards the store. The next moment, his figure turned into afterimages and disappeared around the corner of the street in front of everyone's panic. Roar! Under the violent roar, all the onlookers around him fled in fear. Derek's scarlet pupils stared at the direction in which Lin Ju disappeared, but he did not pursue him. One police car after another slowly parked beside him. The SWAT police, who were fully armed and covered themselves tightly, got out of the car. One of them, who was obviously the leader, slowly walked up to Drake. Forward. His voice suppressed his anger and said in a deep voice, Lord Blood God, why do you want to expose your true body? Boom. With a furious palm, the man's body flew backwards and hit the police car hard, denting the police car. The change of things caused the surrounding SWAT police officers who got out of the police cars to set up their guns and aim at this monster-like man. Scarlet pupils slowly scanned the surroundings, and Derek could clearly sense that they were all vampires. The man who was knocked to the ground slowly got up, suppressed the anger in his heart, and tried to speak in a calm and respectful tone. Master Ancestor now is no better than before. We have to hide in the darkness. Once exposed to human society, it is very likely to bring us disaster. Catching Drake's gaze, the vampire leader breathed a sigh of relief as he watched Drake slowly transform from monster form back to normal form again. Danica, don't you know how to restrain this guy? He really thinks that his identity as the ancestor is a big deterrent, but it is just a medicine for our clan to evolve itself. The vampire leader's eyes hidden under his sunglasses were extremely gloomy. His long-term pampering made him not take the legendary blood god in front of him at all. In this way, Drake left the neighborhood under the leadership of the vampire SWAT officers. In a dilapidated hotel, Lin Ju slowly wiped off the blood stained on his body. It was red and white, some of it belonged to him, and some of it belonged to Drake. You're back. The faint words echoed in the hotel, and a middle-aged woman looked at Lin Ju, who was walking slowly with a smile on her face. How's it going? Have you found your family? The middle-aged woman looked expectant, but Lin Ju just curled her lips and didn't even bother to reply, and walked slowly towards the second floor. TCH, he's so handsome. Can he be as handsome as readers? The middle-aged woman did not ask for trouble. She slowly twisted her plump body and returned to the bar, continuing her day-to-day work. At this time, there was chaos in a certain police station. Dao Feng had just been arrested, but he was rescued again. At this time, the chief was loudly yelling at his incompetent subordinates. Boss, the bodies have been packed away. A police officer quickly rushed forward and whispered. The middle-aged director's eyes flickered. He nodded slowly, glared fiercely at the bewildered police officers, and then walked towards his office. In the originally empty office, a woman sat quietly in his seat. When the middle-aged director saw this scene, instead of being angry, he walked forward respectfully with a smile on his face. This time there is a new threat, and the threat level is even higher than the blade. Danica stared at the human director in front of her. You say, The director handed over a photo and took it with both hands. He looked at the people in the photo with a trace of surprise in his eyes. Asian, is this person more harmful to you vampires than Day Ranger? Lin Ju was awakened by the sound of an alarm bell. He jumped off the bed in an instant. The strange feeling rising in his heart prevented him from showing his head at the window. As the siren went out, under his extraordinary hearing, he heard rapid footsteps slowly approaching the hotel. His eyes narrowed slightly. Lin Ju, who was familiar with the plot, certainly knew that although the police officers in this world were human beings, they were actually controlled by vampires. He looked around the room quickly and quickly came to the door. However, the next moment, the door of the room was blown over with a violent explosion. He did not expect that the other party would use a rocket launcher. Lin Ju was blown backwards. It hit the window eaves hard and then fell down. Along with the gunfire, several bullets hit his body. The moment Lin Ju, who was accidentally hit, landed on the ground, his body twisted, and afterimages flickered on the street, disappearing in front of the shocked police officers at a very fast speed. At the same time, at an abandoned dock, Blade was brought to their base camp by Albert and Hannibal. So, you are Whistler's daughter. The Blade stared at the woman with a beautiful face but exuding heroic spirit. Haha, brother, yes, she is. Hello, my name is Hannibal King, nice to meet you. Hannibal looked at the Blade with a smile on his little face, and his mouth tightened. He kept talking since he rescued the Blade. A hint of helplessness flashed across the face of Dao Feng, who was always serious. Knowing the answer, he turned his head slightly to the side, not wanting to reply to the slightly noisy man next to him. However, Hannibal, who did not receive a reply, became more and more excited as he talked. He revealed everything about how he turned himself into a vampire by himself and was saved by Albert and others. Even a trace of embarrassment flashed across Albert's face. Soon they arrived at the internal laboratory of the dock. A woman with gold-rimmed glasses was staring at the computer screen with flashing images. Doctor, mission accomplished. Albert spoke first. However, the female geneticist was still staring at the computer with a deep gaze. This situation made Albert feel confused, and even Hannibal looked over curiously. Oh, my God, Hannibal screamed, attracting Blade's attention. At this time, a scene was playing on the computer screen. The geneticist slowly looked at the three people who were looking over, and then played back the video. The camera captured a shop on a certain street. With the sound of glass breaking, a man fell out of the shop instantly, and not long after, a woman also fell out. From the angle of the video, you can vaguely see what seemed to be happening inside the shop. There was a fight, and shelves kept collapsing and things were scattered outside, until a figure flew out. Dao Feng's eyes narrowed. The familiar clothes and figure reminded him of Lin Ju, who had left a very deep impression on him. Looking at Lin Ju, who fell to the ground in an instant, his eyes suddenly froze. He had a vague idea of Lin Ju's strength in his mind. However, such a person seemed to be hit by something outside the store. He looked at them one after another. Police officers began to appear on the block, and Lin Ju's figure passed through the afterimages and disappeared in front of the camera. Is this guy a new breed of vampire? Albert's eyes were solemn. She noticed that the video did not speed up. Lin Ju's last disappearing figure made her feel a little bit frightened. It was really as fast as an afterimage. The camera could only capture a blurry black shadow flashing by. The female geneticist's face was extremely solemn. She slowly adjusted the orbital mirror on the bridge of her nose and raised her head to look at the Blade. Sun Ranger, what do you think? Albert and Hannibal on the side both looked over. I know that guy. He calls himself the ancestor of vampires and is not afraid of silverware and sunlight. Oh, my God. Hannibal hugged his face with both hands and sighed. Just when he couldn't help but want to say something decadent, the female geneticist's eyes lit up and stopped him from speaking. Is there any way to deal with him? Deal with him? Didn't you notice another thing? The guy seemed to be knocked away by something. The one that the camera couldn't capture. I think that's the real danger. Quote. The dark face of the Blade stared at the three people in front of him, and he quickly recalled in his mind what Lin Ju had said before. After telling several people about the awakening of the real ancestor of vampires, a hint of excitement flashed across the face of the female geneticist. Two ancestors of vampires, it's over, they're all over. Hannibal screamed, but there was no trace of fear on his face. Blood god. The female geneticist told the legend about the blood god that she had learned. Now we have a way to solve it once and for all, that is to develop a virus that can crack the vampire gene, and I have almost done the research so far. Once and for all, virus. This time Blade finally couldn't help but look at the people in front of him. He didn't expect that there was such a way. Where's that guy? Albert pointed to Lin Ju's figure on the computer screen. I even doubt whether he is a vampire. The female geneticist chuckled and adjusted her glasses. Don't you realize the biggest problem? That guy can be caught on camera. Quote ... exclamation mark quote. Everyone, including Blade, was stunned on the spot, and an awkward atmosphere filled the group of vampire hunters. One night a few days later, Blade took Albert out again to explore Drake's whereabouts. As the dark night enveloped the pier, a figure appeared outside the pier. Looking at the silent and somewhat deserted pier, his appearance slowly changed in some way. After a moment, it turned into Whistler's. He looked like he was walking towards the dock with a swagger. At this time, the geneticist in the dock laboratory was operating the experimental equipment to mix certain reagents, and Hannibal was teasing the geneticist's little daughter. The cheerful laughter of the two people echoed through the empty hall from time to time. Hello. The hearty words interrupted the two people's joyful laughter. Hannibal's heart suddenly condensed, and then he looked at the man who appeared on the stairs above in astonishment. Whistler. Haha, I didn't expect that my daughter would lead the team to develop into what it is today. Whistler smiled and walked slowly down the stairs, staring at Hannibal. Just when Hannibal was at a loss and was about to step forward, a hand instantly grabbed his arm and pulled him back. The geneticist faced the old man coming down the stairs. Who are you? Why are you pretending to be Whistler? After reacting, Hannibal quickly rushed to the table beside him, ready to pick up the gun. The next moment, Whistler jumped down, slapped the geneticist away with a casual palm, and then quickly grabbed Hannibal's neck. The two returned to the dock and walked into the factory. Looking at the messy blood on the ground, Albert's expression changed drastically and he quickly rushed towards the laboratory. The scene in front of her made her look pale, and she knelt on the ground trembling. The Blade's gaze passed over a bloody body hanging on a shelf, and his eyes were ignited with raging anger. Boom! A fierce punch smashed the glass, and just when the two people were in the greatest mood swing, the pattering footsteps slowly approached. Al Bennett subconsciously turned his head to look, couldn't help but exclaimed, rushed forward, and hugged the geneticist fiercely. I thought you were all dead. Albania's voice was crying, and she looked at the geneticist's face wearing sunglasses with tears in her eyes. Haha, it's all thanks to this man. Han Neba on the side also jumped out and couldn't help shouting loudly. The Blade's eyes looked at the figure slowly walking out from behind everyone. Long time no see, Blade. Lin Ju, wearing a black trench coat and a western hat, stepped forward with a smile on his face. Who are you? Albertine's eyes were filled with confusion. Hello, my name is Lin Ju, a special ancestor of vampires. Ancestor. Albertine's eyes narrowed slightly, and he suddenly pulled the geneticist behind him. However, the geneticist patted her shoulder to calm her throbbing heart. Lin, why did you say you are the ancestor of vampires? Hannibal on the side instantly put a hand on Lin Ju's neck, trying to hook him to his side, but found that under his exertion, Lin Ju's figure did not move at all, and a flash of light flashed on his face. Embarrassed, he slowly pulled out his arm. Have you ever seen someone like me? Ah, that's not the case. As everyone began to get to know each other, Lin Ju hid his identity from across the world, and at the same time avoided discussing his vampire identity again. How would these people feel if I showed white blood? Lin Ju couldn't help but secretly think to himself, maybe he is the only one who openly claims to be a vampire in front of a group of vampire hunters, right? So, your target is also the ancestor of vampires. Albertine stared at Lin Ju's smiling face. She had just learned what happened from the geneticist's mouth. Lin Ju had a big battle with the blood god. Under his cover, they escaped safely. As for the hanging bloody corpse, he was one of their companions, but unfortunately Lin Ju didn't have time to save him. Hannibal on the side looked excited. The final battle with the vampire was about to begin. For him, this was a good opportunity for revenge. In the underground factory, Daniel looked deeply at the many vampire leaders gathered at this moment. The blood god has failed to live up to his promise to us. A male vampire roared angrily. This time, they told Drake about the Nightcrawler base camp they finally found. They thought they would be able to destroy those annoying guys, but they still failed without a blade. At this moment, Derek was not here, and the vampires began to complain. Daniel, who was sitting at the head, had extremely gloomy eyes. Knowing the truth, she felt even more irritable. One blade was enough for them, and now a strange guy appeared who could compete with the blood god. He didn't even seem to be a vampire. This made her feel an unprecedented crisis. Above the group of vampires, traces of crystal powder slowly fell. A burly vampire suddenly covered his throat and coughed slightly. In an instant, flames spurted out. All the vampires were shocked. Just as they were panicking, a figure suddenly smashed the skylight glass and jumped down. A group of idiots, I'm here. Hannibal landed smoothly, raised his middle fingers with both hands, and pointed at the vampires who were roaring at him from a distance, with an unbridled smile on his face. The next moment, the vampire with a yellow ponytail rushed forward and punched his body hard to the ground. Oh my god, man, come help me. Hannibal, who was suddenly knocked down, shouted anxiously to the top of the floor. However, the broken upper floor was empty. Hannibal's face froze, and he looked at the vampire he had just frightened, glaring at him. Hey. Trying to maintain a gentle smile, Hannibal crawled back slightly. The yellow-haired vampire roared and rushed away. However, at this moment, another figure jumped down. When Danica, who was at the back of the crowd, saw the face of the person who appeared, her expression changed wildly, and she immediately rushed towards the rear passage. She actually ran away. An afterimage passed by, and the body of the yellow-haired vampire was like a parabola, hitting the wall of the secret room heavily, and the wall made of steel was instantly dented. At this time, after Hannibal saw the person clearly, he got up from the ground and hid behind him with an arrogant expression. He raised his big middle fingers with both hands and breathed fragrance to the vampires surrounding them. Get away quickly and don't affect me. Lin Ju looked helplessly at Hannibal who was close to him, a hint of embarrassment flashed across his face. Hannibal made a strange cry while taunting the vampire, and finally shouted loudly, Lin, give this guy a good beating. Hewn bitch's ass. The next moment, the vampires rushed over. Some even wanted to bypass Lin Ju and attack Hannibal. However, afterimages shuttled in front of each vampire. Bang bang bang, accompanied by the sound of the collision of flesh. The vampires flew out and slowly drew out the silver sword from their backs. All the vampires looked at Lin Ju with horrified expressions. The unparalleled speed made them feel a hint of fear. Outside the corridor, as the vampires' iconic roars and screams came from the secret room, Hannibal hummed a tune with an expression of admiration on his face. As expected of a man who calls himself a vampire, he looks more like a vampire than a vampire. Look at this scream, tisk tisk. Hannibal shook his head, and soon he came to the hall and paused on the spot. Where did the puppy come from? Looking at the short puppy, Hannibal couldn't help but make a mocking face at it. However, the next moment, the puppy's mouth slowly opened to both sides, and a small tentacle stretched out. Wow! Hannibal let out a strange cry and subconsciously took a step back, looking at the puppy nervously. Hey, you are much more majestic than your tongue looks. While talking, he looked at the wall behind him from the corner of his eye. When he noticed that there was no retreat behind him, his expression suddenly changed. Not even your master dares to bare his teeth at me, you little piece of shit, how dare you come here? Slowly pulling out the silver dagger from his side pocket, Hannibal looked at this person seriously. A puppy the size of a human head, he was ready to kill it with his sword. Just when he was about to give it a try, two large black dogs with calf height walked slowly from one side and stood behind the puppy. Hannibal, who was about to charge forward, changed his expression instantly and looked a little flattering, looking at the puppy who started to grin. The next moment, with a strange scream, he ran frantically towards the floor-to-ceiling window behind him, while three dogs that turned into vampire dogs chased after him. Just as he broke the glass and fell downstairs, he grabbed the railing above with both hands and jumped up. The three dogs were unable to stop him and rushed down the floor and fell downwards. With a little strength in his arms, he jumped back to the room easily. Hannibal reached his head down and looked at the dog falling downstairs with a look of dismay on his face. Small one. I hope everyone will support it and subscribe more.